All right, this is the second episode of Gigahand Dreams. Again, I just want to remind you that this is a long-form conversation format. So we're going to talk for hours in a natural arc, the most ancient form of media that ever existed, two people talking about what they're curious about or what comes up for them.
Gigahand Dreams is funded in part by the National Science Foundation.
My second ever guest is Rosenbaum, and he's a longtime prolific collaborator. Him and I have invented a range of tools together that all center around this idea of making people feel like they could do anything. So I flew to Boston, and here's the conversation we had. I want to live in a world built by all of us. A gigahand is a measure of worldwide creativity. How can we reinvent learning? What would a world look like built by 8 billion pairs of hands? This is the Gigahand Dreams podcast.
Dude. It's a long time getting here.
We made it.
We did make it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me do this.
Oh, thanks for coming. It's just so great to be here with you in my house.
It's a good excuse to be here. Yeah. And you're in your house a lot because you're adding to your family.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I have a 3-month-old baby, Izzy, downstairs.
And she rocks the crazy hairdo.
She has excellent hair.
Excellent hair.
And hopefully she's taking a nap right now.
Yeah, we might hear her.
Yep. But Catherine's doing a very nice job taking care of her while we do this.
We've known each other for 15 years, 13 years?
I think it's 15.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the first time that I think it was the first time I met you literally in person was when you got accepted into the lifelong kindergarten group at Media Lab, and you walked through the front doors of the Cube, which was a basement prototyping room with offices and equipment and no sun.
I loved the Cube. It was a black box experimental theater space with an incredible grid on the ceiling that you could hang stuff from, like your cardboard Millennium Falcon or inflatable elephant. It was a very creative space.
Yeah. And I remember you walked in and you sat down at the table. I think the table had the tree in the middle of it, but it might not have yet. Did it have it already? We had cut a table in half and put a tree in the middle of the table so that we'd get the dappled light. So there was some sense of outsideness.
That was a beautiful, beautiful space. Yeah.
You sat down and we had an idea together, but I didn't know who each other were yet. And it was an idea in this programming language we were making called Scratch, led by Mitch Resnick at MIT. Mm-hmm. And we were students there. And we both had kind of the same idea, which I think is characteristic of how we've worked together over the years. If people don't know, we've worked together since the moment we're talking about, more or less.
15 years ago. I was thinking about that earlier today too. Scratch had just launched to the world.
Yeah.
And people were...
people were making projects and some of them needed a memory, but there was no memory in Scratch. Like right now in Scratch, there's a way to keep track of a bunch of variables called an array.
A list in Scratch.
It's called a list in Scratch. And there was no way to do that at the time. You couldn't keep track of what happened in the past, or not very easily at all. So I feel like we both had the idea that we wanted to try writing down colors, storing numbers as colors on the screen. So we would just poop out little colors on the screen in a big long line, and then we could read them back out later.
Right. So there was a scheme where different colors would mean different numbers. And you could make the little characters in Scratch are called sprites. You could make it walk across and put down, red, red, blue, orange, orange, blue, or whatever. And that would mean a certain number or series of numbers.
Yeah, and that was a simple concept, but in a way it's like emblematic of the type of collaboration we've had where we're like, let's have numbers be colors, or let's have something be something. Mm-hmm. And let's cross senses or cross word. You're not supposed to store a number as a color. It's not a crazy idea.
But it pushed the boundaries of what people thought Scratch was capable of. And I've always loved doing that.
And then we tried to do weird stuff like sound wave matching using reading colors off the screen, just like weird like machine learning and computer vision stuff in a janky way with our fake array made of colors.
But what did that first one do? I think it might have been something that I made originally. So we had that idea to store a sequence of numbers as colors. And I used that to turn the numbers into a little drawing program. So it would control the sprite moving around on the screen to draw geometric patterns.
Oh, that's right. It would do spirals and stuff.
Mandala kind of patterns. And then you came along and said, oh, this is a dance. And so we added sounds to it, first of all.
Right.
And then the sprite became a body, a person. And so then we renamed the project Dances for Universal Peace.
Right, inspired by the Sufis.
Which you had just experienced newly, I think.
That's right.
And I think at that time also, like, I don't know what you were talking about. You know what I mean? Like, I was intrigued and curious about that kind of stuff, but it felt further away from my experience, certainly than it does now.
Well, and 15 years ago, the idea of meditation was in the middle of its arc, where it was like, this isn't terrible, but it's not accepted. Whereas like maybe 50 years before that, it might have been, what the heck? Like, no.
And I think for me, I was aware of that stuff, but felt like, oh, that's not who I am. That's not my expertise. And one of the things that was amazing to me about you is that, I mean, you came in with your Paisley surf shorts and that is who you were. And I thought, wow, like the conversation between us expands my mind in this whole set of directions that I wasn't thinking in before.
And mine too. It was really a union of two circles, and it allowed my mind to go into some of the spaces your mind was in.
We're so lucky that we had that.
I think it's a weird matchup. It's like, I haven't had it the same collaborative, spheric expansion, like mind space expansion, or unioning with anyone else in the same way. And what it gives me is some special channel into seeing new thought spaces almost firsthand. I guess it's not literally firsthand, but it feels like one step away from firsthand. And that is like exhilarating as a thinker, because now I've like increased the space I can see, for example.
It's so true. And I think there's an essential ingredient too, that a lot of what we do creatively is conversation, but I think it's really crucially like grounded in not just seeing and thinking and talking, but doing and making and playing. And I've learned a lot from you about that. Like I arrived at Media Lab as a maker and doer, but I saw you making and doing in quite a different style.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm kind of not mechanically gifted, and because I would almost say I'm not good at making, so I have to just like I make like a clown. Like I just come in and like I've learned to make. I'm not saying that, but I'm clumsy. I have bad eyesight. I have bad hand-eye coordination, and so I just fumble around and try stuff, and it's kind of almost seems performative, but I'm just not that good. And then I've learned to do it that way.
And I think of myself as having, I love crafting and making little things and putting stuff together, and I do build stuff, but I think the ingredient for me that I understand now in retrospect that you had a lot more of was just the creative confidence part of it, to believe like, oh, I have this impulse to put a tree in the middle of that table, and I'm going to do whatever it takes, and I believe that I can do that, even if it's not obvious how from the start. And I've definitely benefited from having more of that in myself.
Yeah, moving as quick as possible forward. Put the tree in the middle of the table. Don't cut the hole yet. Just put it in the middle. What does it look like? Okay, I learned something.
Yeah. That kind of doing and making together as conversation has been, I think, a big part of like how we've arrived at new things together.
What job were you working before joining Media Lab?
Just before Media Lab, I was at a different part of MIT at the teacher education program, working for a professor named Eric Klopfer. And one of the projects was a version of Star Logo, which was originally a project from Mitch Resnick, who became both of our thesis advisor.
What was Star Logo?
Star Logo was a beautiful project about evolving from the first programming language for children, which was simple commands to control a graphical turtle on the screen or a physical one on the floor, to draw patterns using a set of geometric commands.
Okay, so Logo let you look at a turtle as if from a bird's eye view, a turtle on the screen, tell it to move forward, turn right, move forward, turn right. And if you do that 4 times, you draw a square and then make other patterns from there.
Yeah. And that goes all the way back to the 60s. And Mitch, when he was doing his PhD, asked, what happens if instead of one turtle, you could write a simple program, just as simple, but it controls 10 or 100 or 1,000 turtles?
So what if 1,000 turtles moved forward and turned right 4 times and drew 1,000 squares?
And then what if they could detect what color they're touching in the world and also draw on the world in those colors? And then you get emergent phenomena, and you could start simulating cars in traffic or ants laying pheromone trails.
So a bunch of little critters running around all interacting with each other with simple rules. Like ants have really, presumably, somewhat simple rules that determine their interaction, but out of those simple rules come these swarm behaviors that make the whole colony work.
So that's Star Logo, super inspiring. And I was working with Eric Klopfer on a kind of one of the successors to that project years later. This is we're in 2006, 2007. It was called Star Logo, the Next Generation, and he wanted to do it in 3D. It was kind of 2.5D in the end. But you could make really beautiful simulations, but that were worlds that you could be inside of. I made a orbital gravity simulator, and then you could put the perspective of the camera onto one of the planets, and it was like flying around on a roller coaster.
Because the planets would circle the sun really quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we did like disease, like epidemic simulations, but you could be inside of the crowd of people, and maybe it was like a game, so you could control your player and try not to get infected.
Oh, it's nice instead of always just looking at the whole stage at once, looking at the whole scene of all the germs or all the rabbits or all the planets. Instead of looking at them all at once, you could become one of them, and that's where the camera comes in to that one. Exactly. I never saw that stuff.
Star Logo TNG, yeah, it's a beautiful project in its own way. And another strange fact about it is that it was actually released as a programming language that used graphical blocks, which is what Scratch, as we were talking about earlier, uses. And so it was an early entry into that world also, to try to make programming more accessible by making these blocks that you snap together on the screen to create code.
How is it that you're coding? Like, you don't even have a background in coding, is that right?
Sort of.
Okay.
I studied psychology in college. I was doing like neuroscience, auditory neuroscience. I've always been fascinated by music and sound.
At Harvard.
I play the trombone, and I was just interested in perception. Like, how does it work in the brain, and why is music the way it is? And
ooh, tell me about that. Why is music the way it is in the brain, Eric?
I never figured that out. And I realized at some point working in a neuroscience lab that like this life of just trying to do the grind, which is powerful and important for some people, it didn't suit my temperament, I realized when I was in college, fortunately. And at the same time, as part of my job, I was using MATLAB, which is a scientific computing tool. And I realized, in addition to like analyzing the patterns of spikes from neurons that we were measuring in response to sounds, that I could use it to analyze the sounds, or one day late at night, like in the lab, to synthesize sounds.
You never told me that you got into, or I forgot if you told me that you got into sound synthesis in MATLAB. That's one of my favorite things to do, and nobody likes doing that.
It was so fun, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so every sound I could make was amazing because I was kind of inventing it for myself without understanding that there were lots of other tools out there, which I later, learned to use.
Okay, so to make sounds in MATLAB, it's almost like, I don't know if this is literally what it's named after, but I think of it as like a math lab. Maybe it's supposed to be Matrix Lab or something. But anyway, like you can use math to generate, say, like a sine wave, and then you can call a function, called SC sound or something like that, on the sine wave, and then the sine wave will play out to the speakers attached to the computer. So then you hear like a tone, like ooh or something,
like boop,
yeah, more like that. But not only can you make sine waves,
you can use math to decorate time with patterns of sound, and it was beautiful in a way because I had used music software, which has these assumptions and constraints of Western tonality and the way we break up time. But in MATLAB, none of that exists. You have to build it up. And so I could make, for example, crazy polyrhythms, like complex rhythmic patterns that would be hard to express with standard music notation or tools. But with a program where you're just manipulating numbers, it doesn't know about common time in music, 4/4 time. And so you could just make whatever crazy patterns you want. And I remember experimenting with the continuum between clicks and tones by making something start very slow, like, and then speed up. And then if you get faster and faster, which I can't do with my tongue, eventually you would get like, and then it would go up in pitch. And it's all just the same process of speeding up, but there's this barrier between what you hear as discrete sounds that are rhythmic, and it becomes pitch eventually.
Right. If you tap the table 1 time a second, or if a bird flaps its wings 1 time a second, then you hear a whoosh or a tick or whatever. If you do that 10 times a second, you hear something like or something like that. If you start to do it over 20 times a second, let's say 100, or like a hummingbird, I think like 200 or 400, maybe 400 times a second, you start to hear a tone.
Yeah.
And that's why when a hummingbird or a mosquito buzzes by your ear,
and you hear, and it you might not hear the individual pulses. You might just hear yeah.
Yeah, you don't even hear them. And a mosquito's, right? And that is all of the flapping going on.
And the pitch tells you something about how fast it's going. So if the pitch goes up, it's getting faster.
And so you were making little clicks, click sound wave. You were using math to make a sound, a shape, basically, that would click when it went to the speaker. You send that shape to the speaker clicks in your ear, basically, and then you were doing those clicks closer and closer together until they became a tone.
And then my favorite thing actually is the fact that polyrhythms, like I mentioned earlier, rhythmic patterns in time, become harmonies. There's a sense in which rhythms are harmonies. Harmonies are rhythms.
What? I've never heard of that. So is a polyrhythm like, okay, normal time would be 4/4 time. That would be the most normal in some sense, at least in the West. And so that's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And
right.
So then what would be a polyrhythm?
It's really just, you can think of it as like a fraction. So if you have something happening 4 times per second,
yeah,
and then you have another thing that's happening 3 times per second,
right,
then it doesn't divide evenly.
So you're saying that metaphorically the rhythms harmonize together. So like, can we do 3 to 4? If I do 4, can you do 3?
That's probably too hard to do right now.
Yeah, okay.
I can kind of tap 3 against 2.
Oh, really?
I don't know if I want to try.
What?
Anyway.
So that's 3 and 2 mixing, and it does sound like they go together in their own way.
And so the thing is, harmonies are, one way to think about harmony is that it's a relationship between 2 pitches that have a ratio. And so we're talking about 2 rhythms that have a ratio. So say you had, we'll take a simple one, 2-to-1 ratio. So that would be like, you tap one thing slow and the other one twice as fast.
Right, that's a simple ratio that goes together nicely and quickly.
And if you speed that up, you'll hear not 1 tone, but 2. And what's the musical interval between those?
Oh, right. They'll be octaves of each other.
That's exactly right.
Because something becomes a higher, like if you have middle C and then you have the C above that, then those are double the frequency of each other.
Exactly. And so it turns out these other rhythmic ratios become musical ratios, musical intervals.
I never thought about it that way.
And so it's been a while, but I think 3 against 2 becomes a fifth. So
that sounds right.
Like C and G. And then, of course, you can play with other ratios. It's just one of those really beautiful connections between the mathematics of different aspects of music that shows you, in a way, it's all the same thing at the bottom. It's all patterns in time, mathematical intervals and ratios. I mean, of course, it's not all that. It's also culture and perception. But a part of its origin comes from the math of those relationships. And also, of course, the reason we have those phenomena in the human world are that the physics of how objects vibrate like generate those phenomena too. But,
Right. How the sound waves get into our ears in the first place.
yeah.
I really like the idea though that we're getting into the idea of listening to math, which is, I've heard it mentioned before for sure, but it's not like well practiced. And you can listen to circuits, this electricity circuits, you can listen to math, and you can go in MATLAB and make math functions and then send them to your speaker. Like we never send our math functions to our speaker. Like, that's what we're missing, dude. Like, I had so much fun just once I found out I could do that, I was just sending functions to my speaker. So the normal thing to do is say like sine of like time, sine of t, and then send that to your speaker, and then you'll get just a tone. And then you can also say like sine of t plus sine of 2t, and then that'll be like one sine wave and another sine wave that's twice as fast. And then you can listen to those and they'll be in harmony with each other at an octave ratio. Or if you do 3/2 of t, then it'll be like a fifth harmony, etc. And then you start doing crazy stuff. Instead of putting sine of t in there, you start putting like t squared in there, like sine of t squared. And then you get, instead of getting a constant tone, you get a tone that goes up and up and up, ooh, over time.
Yeah.
And then I started doing like sine of t. So then and then you get like an ambient sound, like wee,
Yeah.
which is the sound of the frequency going up and down, because everyone knows a sine wave goes up and down, up and down. And so the frequency that would come out of the speaker would go up and down, up and down. So you basically get a like wee, 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 or if you do it fast enough, wee, 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 and it turns out that's the damn Pac-Man sound.
Nice.
They did a sine of t inside there.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And I'd put t cubed and all this stuff, and you'd get I played air on a G string, and it was all composed in MATLAB. And instead of just using sines, I would change it to different functions. So like, I actually forget how air on a G string goes. Do you remember how it goes?
No.
So instead of like, I'll just do Pachelbel's canon or something, but instead of being like do 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 do, it was like woo 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 woo, and it would just like have these weird modulations in it because I would throw crazy functions into it. But I was playing with math. And it was like I was staying up late, and my roommates were coming. What are you doing? And, oh, that's cool. And then we were all playing with math, and that was fun.
That's beautiful, man. So yeah, that was a very influential experience for me.
I can't believe we had the same.
In like 2000 or 2001.
Cool.
Yeah.
Same time for me.
Yeah.
Same year.
We didn't even talk about the harmonic series, but that's a whole other powerful idea that I discovered at that time. And it was like, wow.
Whatever you want to talk about.
That's how this works. The harmonic series is just, one description is just integer multiples of the frequency. So if you have something happening 100 times a second, and then also 200 and 300 and 400 times a second, and you keep going up, it turns out resonant sounds like a string plucked or a column of air vibrating, like in my voice right now. It's just the way nature works, the way those things resonate. They have all those frequencies in them.
Oh, right. So like if you have a pipe organ or just a pipe, let's say, and like wind blows, I guess, through it, then the lowest frequency you can get out of it is the length of the pipe, at least I think. Maybe you can do a half length. I'm not sure. But let's just say it's the length of the pipe. And then you can do double. You can fit 2 waves in the pipe, and you could fit 3 waves in the pipe. So there would be all of these. Is that the harmonic series that you're talking about?
Sure is.
You might be able to fit half waves. I'm not sure.
And yeah, I mean, I'm not a physicist, but the harmonic series has this beautiful explanatory power because, oh, maybe you can hear my infant Izzy talking a little bit.
Izzy.
What's up? Those frequencies that are all combined to make one musical note, like, if you take it apart and listen to them, they actually are musical notes. And so you can construct a major triad, like, C, E, G, like the notes that
like when the barber shop goes, hello, hello, hello.
Yeah. Those notes are in that series of frequencies that you just get from the way the world works, from the way things resonate physically.
So modern harmonics, like modern harmony, like at least I'm familiar with Western harmony, comes in a way just like right out of nature.
Yeah, we shouldn't state it too strongly because it's not the case that, like, there's a lot of diversity in musical culture and what different people think.
Yeah, I would just meant that as a question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if everybody hears consonance and dissonance around the world the same way.
Yeah,
but there are these physical universals that seem to generate a lot of what we think of as at least harmony in music.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool that if you just strike something, it always makes a sound. It's like a cool property of the world. Like in a video game, if when you touch something, it doesn't make a sound, that's like bad design. I mean, I don't know. I think it is. But the reason for that is if you touch something, like it makes a sound. I mean, you might have to put your ear up close, but like a table makes a clack and a pole makes a clang and skin makes a, or like food makes like a click and like skin makes like kind of a whoosh and like everything makes a sound when you touch it at some level.
Yeah.
It's such a cool feedback. Good job, world.
Totally. And that is a big part of how we understand the materiality of stuff around us.
By scraping it and poking it and you hear things and feel things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So let's see. Before we go into all the cool stuff that you make, maybe we can go back a little further. We're kind of doing, I didn't plan it this way, but we're kind of doing a reverse bio a little bit, a hodgepodge of a reverse bio. So before Harvard, you went to school and you had at least one really cool teacher in fourth grade that you've told me about a lot of times. And I think people would really like to hear a little about that.
So I had this amazing teacher. In fourth grade named Mr. Levy. And we would come into the classroom in the morning and he would have spent hours drawing an entire chalkboard covered in colored chalk with a scene from Norse mythology. And then with the lights dimmed, he would tell us a story about Loki and Thor and Odin. He's a big guy with this incredible deep voice. And then he had colored beeswax for us to play with, which if you've never played with this, it's really satisfying. You can sort of warm it up in your hands. You have to like smoosh it around a lot until it's pliable. And then you could make little sculptures. And I just loved making little creatures and figures. And so as he told us these stories from mythology around the world, we would build these dioramas of just little handmade creatures. He had us draw a lot. We would always be coloring and stuff with colored pencils. And at the end of the year, we made a book out of all of the illustrated stories and also mathematical patterns that we'd colored in. And so this sense of like understanding your own learning by making things and then looking at the artifact you had put together at the end. I still have that book somewhere. But also one day, his friend came into the classroom with these huge trash bags full of something smelly. And it was this gross sort of gray and white woolly stuff. It needed to get washed, and we washed it. And then you use these combs to straighten out the fibers, to align them. It's called carding. And then we learned about spinning. So it was just raw sheep's wool.
Someone sheared some sheeps and brought it in.
Yep. And we cleaned it and learned about spinning it to make yarn. And then we made our own knitting needles. Oh, and we made dye. We learned about how, the certain purple color or red color comes from this beetle. But
did you collect beetles?
I don't think we actually collected beetles. But we definitely had jars of different colors dyeing the yarn. And then we made our own knitting needles and we learned how to knit. And just that sense of like learning about where things come from and how they're made through this really rich hands-on experience. Or like he had another friend who brought in just a box of rocks. And it's like, well, what can we find out about these rocks?
Is this all fourth grade?
I remember more from that one year.
The teacher is epic.
Mr. Levy was incredible. Later on, he was a National Teacher of the Year.
Wow.
He wrote a book called Starting from Scratch, coincidentally, which is a beautiful book. It's not about Scratch. It's about how he ran his classroom.
Buy Mr. Levy's book now.
And something that I made is in the book. Actually, in a way, it's something that my mom made because we did a project about the Lexingtons. So I grew up in a town called Lexington in Massachusetts. And the question was, where did our town get its name from? And if you look in an atlas, because this was, I'm not sure what year, the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in 4th grade. Anyway, if you look it up, there's a lot of Lexingtons in the United States. And so, classroom full of 30 kids, we each were assigned one. I got Lexington, Georgia. And so we wrote letters and mailed them to the mayors of each of the Lexingtons in the United States and asked them, well, do you know where the name of your town came from? And we found out, of course, this is not surprising in retrospect, they were named after either each other or our Lexington, because Lexington, Massachusetts was the oldest and site of a Revolutionary War battle. But as part of that project, we made little poster presentations, and there's a picture of the one that I made, I guess with my mom's help, in the book that he published. I'm very proud of that.
Nice.
Lexington, Georgia doesn't have a lot of interesting stuff in it, or at least at that time. I think one minor pro wrestler lived there, so I got a picture of his house from the mayor. Some kids from the bigger Lexingtons got like souvenirs and stuff. But.
Yeah, so I actually am surprised. I knew you had this special 4th grade teacher, but I never heard you put it together that way before, especially when you were talking about the book and the stories on the chalkboard and the pictures that you made in the book and the way you put the book together and just all the other like visual and the dyeing and all this stuff and the sensory stuff. I'm surprised how much that relates to how you do work in the world now. So it brings up the question, did you resonate with that teacher so much because of the way you were, or did that experience really change you and influence your research path in the future?
It's hard to answer. I think that it was very influential because as an adult thinking about learning, I thought about my own life experiences and like what mattered to me. What do I remember? What do I carry with me? And those experiences were so powerful that I just wanted to recreate that feeling again for other people of these kinds of like, touching the wool, knitting the yarn that I had dyed into an artifact that I could bring home and share with my family. That all those parts are so meaningful.
Yeah, this is another way that things come full circle for us in a sense, because all the activities you described, I think all of them are Waldorf activities. Like Steiner taught teachers to practice. Rudolf Steiner taught teachers to practice those in the Waldorf classroom. Dyeing wool, spinning wool, knitting, chalking, storytelling, and bookmaking.
Yeah, Mr. Levy was definitely influenced by that tradition.
Right. And then my wife is just really into Waldorf methodologies too. And I was really influenced by it too. And so this is like another connecting point that I just wasn't fully aware of how possibly influential that 4th grade was. That's cool.
We are really different from each other, Jay, but it turns out that there are certain things that resonate between us.
Nice.
From unexpected corners. Yeah.
Nice. So you've made a ton of cool stuff that a lot of people across the world are really excited about, but they probably don't get to hear you talk about it as much as they would want to, especially if they're listening to you now. And so I don't know where to start because you have a lot of cool projects. I actually don't know. Do you remember a first interactive art project or a first, media art project that you made? Do you have a sense of what was first? I mean, it's hard because maybe when you were 5, you like taped some string to a fan. I don't know, but do you have a sense of what your first one would be or what you want to call your first one?
I'm thinking about it because in those MATLAB days of using math to make sound, those were not really interactive projects.
Right.
I was also playing with cellular automata.
Okay.
About that. We don't have to deep dive on that. That's a whole other story. It's more about the aesthetics of it that I was interested in. But around that time was when when I was in college, when I learned about what Mitch Resnick and his group at the Media Lab were doing.
Really? That's amazing.
And I think that I learned about it in part through getting a Lego Mindstorms kit because it came out in 1997, that first Lego robotics kit. I got it maybe the next year or the year after and played with it in my college dorm room and also like at home over the summer. I remember I made a paper airplane launcher The idea was it would detect when you open the door of my dorm room and then shoot a paper airplane at you. But dealing with the mechanical forces to like release the rubber band that would shoot the airplane took so long to like release the pin to let the rubber band go that you'd open the door and then like 30 seconds later it would shoot out. But anyway, so that wasn't really an interactive art piece though.
No, but right. But that was, you were tinkering, you were thinking, and it shows how Mindstorms, which was made for, in a sense, made for like kids in a classroom or kids to play at home. It shows how it actually made other constructionists, like you became a person who made creative platforms in the constructionist paradigm, and you received Mindstorms before you ever met Mitch and before you ever met Seymour. And so it's a way of disseminating information. You know, you could have read his book and, you know, and you eventually did, but you read his tool before you read his book.
And I was ready for it too, in a way where I knew just enough programming to make something come to life using that tool. And I knew enough about Lego and Lego Technic to build mechanisms. But what it did, as you're saying, do is awaken in me this idea that I could learn by making these things, and that I wanted to bring that to other people.
This is too good. This almost seems like we planned this out this way. This is awesome.
And it's timely too, because that Mindstorms kit was so influential for me and a lot of other people. And actually just recently Lego announced that they'll be discontinuing that particular line of Lego robotics stuff. It's worth saying they do other beautiful Lego robotics kits.
Yeah, the latest kit is Spike.
The Lego Spike Prime, yeah.
And I was actually just at Lego headquarters a couple days ago, and we were YouTubing something, and it came up like, wah, they're discontinuing Mindstorms or something. Yeah. But you know, obviously they're putting out things that arguably take the place of it in a nicer way. So.
Oh yeah, it will go on. It was not long after that I learned about Mitch Resnick's work at the Media Lab, and that they were experimenting with this platform called the Cricket, which it was another branch in the evolutionary tree of these Lego robotics kits for kids.
Yeah, it was like in a way, it was like a Lego Mindstorms that was more of what they wanted it to be or something.
Yeah, and how would we describe that? It was less focused on Lego building with Lego bricks and more focused on, it had Lego motors, but you would also use craft materials like pipe cleaners and colored paper and little googly eyes. And
it didn't have less motors and more colors and sounds.
That seems right.
More LEDs, more speakers, and less motors. And of course, the instructions were less about robots and less about cars and more about Ferris wheels and like bringing your stuffed animals to life and things like that.
Yeah, so the Cricket, which was a research project, evolved into the Pico Cricket, Pico for Playful Invention Company, that became a product a few years later, and it was so beautiful. But yeah, some of my first electronics projects were playing around with the Cricket with people at MIT Museum at that time. I remember actually the very first thing that I tried to make, I went to a workshop there, and the people were very generous in trying to help me do what I wanted to make. And one thing I wanted to make was a bubble machine. And I had a little desktop fan, that just plugs into the wall. And I thought, oh, maybe we can switch this on and off using the Cricket. And it's like, well, you're going to need a relay. And what's that? And so, and it's like, oh, okay, we'll just take this apart and we'll need to solder the wires back together with the relay, and we could switch the relay with the Cricket. So relay is an electrically controlled switch. And then the Cricket was a little programmable device that could actuate that could actually flip the switch on and off. So we would be able to turn the fan on and off using a program that we wrote for the Cricket. But I didn't know about any of that. I'd never soldered anything before, so I think that was the first time I soldered. And we got that working, which is super exciting. And then I took... so
this is a bubble machine.
Sorry if I didn't say that, but that's what
you did.
Trying to do. And I took one of the Lego motors and put a bubble wand on it, and I got a little bowl full of bubble solution and put it all together. And of course the result was the fan just spraying the bubble soap all over the table. Like, it just made a big mess. But I think I would have needed another hour to make something that really could reliably blow bubbles. But the satisfaction of just imagining that and taking this thing from my house that went from being an appliance to like a raw material that I could transform the purpose of it, the fan,
Oh, that's nice.
Was really meaningful to me. And the sense of like, oh, like there's not already a way to do that with this kit. In other words, like with the relay to actuate the fan, but we can make it possible with these tools by, you know, cutting things open and soldering them and hot gluing them.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of nice ideas in there. One of them was you didn't finish, but just seeing that you could go that way was meaningful to you.
Yes.
And I don't even know if that's ever been named before because I don't hear it talked about a lot, but there's the thought space that opens up when you know you could do something. If you can't or don't know if you can do something, then you can't think about it the same way. Like if you were in Rome, you could wander around and see what was out there, but you're not going to think about it because we're in Boston. But if you could wander around Rome, suddenly your mind really activates in a different way. Or if you suddenly have, if you have access to Photoshop, well, now whose head should I chop off and put on whose body? You're not going to think about it if you don't have Photoshop and know how to use it. So having a tool and having the ability to possibly go down different pathways activates different thought patterns in somebody's mind. I think that's what you're referring to at the end of the bubble, that you didn't finish making the motor dip the wand in the bubbles and pull it back out. But the fact that you were about to, and you could see that you could maybe do that if you had a little more time, brought a whole bunch of new ideas and mental energy online.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that what we're able to imagine is really strongly influenced by the tools that we use. Like, you don't just come up with ideas for making anything, even though anything is possible. What you can imagine is really shaped by the things that you've used to make things with. Oh, I didn't. It must be
one way to brainstorm is to sit, is to just sit with your eyes closed and think of things. Another way is to sit in a field and look at clouds and let random input come into you and have that influence, or go on a walk with a friend. Another way is to have a bunch of tools on the table and a bunch of materials on the table and touch them and think of a really, really dumb idea and start doing it, and then see what can launch off of that. And so in this way, the tools and materials inform a thought space.
They totally do. And so being able to make something in that way with the Cricut kit really influenced my sense of what was going to be possible for me. That's another thing I think is really important. It's not just my sense of like what can be made or what I can make, but like what I can be, who I can be, how I can make things in new ways. And so it changed my life in that moment, that one workshop.
Yeah, it does seem like like bordering on some kind of a spiritual experience, in the sense that, at least inspiring, let's say. And so that means that that is maybe one of the reasons why you have continued to make these, because it was so influential on you in fourth grade and with the bubble wand and ongoing.
And wanting to bring that transformative experience of changing your sense of who you are and what you can make, and therefore who you can be in the world and how you can transform it. I wanted to bring that experience to other people. And I think creative tools are one way to do that, or at least that's the way that I see as my role, is helping people to have those powerful experiences through the tools that I help to make.
Yeah, it's like you were a different person before and after. I mean, it's a small jump because it's one moment, but if we want to like focus on it like a little, I guess before you made the bubble wand and after, I wonder, you were young, right? So you still had that youthful sense of, hey, am I going to be someone? What am I going to do?
And there's this, it's worth mentioning, there's this barrier to those things too, like electronics, like the physics of it, or the electrical engineering, or the computer science, all of these technical fields. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to like study them and get a degree or something, or the people that do them professionally have training and stuff. And so the idea that you could just mess around and try different things until it works, or ask somebody who does know and they'll be stoked to just help you make it work. That's a completely different way of thinking about it that runs contrary in a way to the ideas that our society tells you about expertise. And that unlocked something for me as well. Like, I didn't study those technical areas. I took one computer science course in college and no electronics. And I learned that actually some of that is accessible. I can hack things together and make things. Around that time also I learned about circuit bending, which is taking like a little electronic toy that makes sound, like a little music toy, and just modifying it by doing something in a way that's breaking it. It's just by like, licking your finger and putting it onto touching two places on the circuit board at the same time to change a resistance, and that changes the pitch of the sound.
So you crack open the toy.
You crack open the toy and you modify its circuit board by, soldering wires onto it.
But you said licking your finger and touching it. That's so much cooler than soldering wires.
Well, that's how you start. I recently showed.
So can people do this at home? Like if they have an electronic toy, like?
Yeah. It's probably something that was more common 20 years ago than now.
Yeah.
That like you'll have a little toy that just makes bleeps and bloops when you press buttons.
Right.
And then it has a circuit in it where.
Like a Hallmark card or a baby toy or.
Yep. And where the sounds are stored digitally on a little circuit, like on a little chip on the circuit board. But the way that the sounds are played back depends on something that sets the timing, like how fast it's playing the sound. Really, it has a frequency. And that little circuit that sets the timing depends on a resistance, which is the property of one of the little components on the board, a resistor. And if you just lick your finger and touch both ends of where the resistor is soldered to the board, you make a parallel circuit over your skin with that wet skin that actually, Jay, would that increase or decrease the resistance?
Two parallel resistors are like two pipes of water. And if you're trying to flow water through one pipe or two pipes, just like cars down one lane or two lanes, it decreases the resistance. More cars and more water can flow and more electrons can flow.
Thank you, Jay. And then that, I think generally if I recall correctly, that generally will speed up the clock that's playing the sound, and then the sound gets faster, and you can actually control it with the pressure of your finger by just like pressing a little harder. It goes up and you release and it goes down, and it's so fun to play with, just messing with the sounds. And so I made we had a little thing that made beats, and I added little metal foil patches to it so you could press two thumbs on it, and the harder you press, the more it would speed up, and so you could control it with just like these very subtle nuances of finger pressure. And then we also had a little, at a house after college with some of my friends that I played music with. And
I like this I want to hear about these people, but
we had a basement. The house was called Rufus because it was a roof over us. And the basement was where the funk band that I played with would rehearse. We had a shag rug and a drum riser and a PA system and a mixing board and everything. But we could plug in.
I like how important that you also have the shag rug.
Big Red, the shag rug was called. And, yeah, it was great. We'd have jam sessions down there. But my friend, the drummer, who also lived there, had this toy that he would beatbox into that was like a tiny plastic megaphone. Like you'd press a trigger and talk into it, and it would change, a little voice changer. And so I was able to add a dial to it that would actually like change the pitch up and down. And so it became much more expressive, especially when I realized if I wanted to run the sound of this thing into the giant PA system that we had in the basement, the big speakers, I could just add a little jack, 1/8-inch jack, and then plug the same cable you plug into a guitar into this little toy. And so now it was circuit bent. It was modified to change the pitch of your voice, and we could make it huge. And, these little toys have really crunchy, distorted sound. And when you make that a lot louder and it's run through speakers instead of the tiny speaker on the toy, like one that can reproduce really low and really high frequencies, it gets really annoying, but it's really awesome too.
And you're like 22 playing with your band and throwing these circuits in, and everyone's excited that you've got it. And
yeah,
that's nice.
And so that was empowering. Also around that time, I learned, I think I saw on the internet, we did have the internet in those days, 20 years ago, someone had a little circuit diagram, which I just barely knew enough to read, showing how to make, we called it the fun strip. That's not its official name. We had an organ in the basement that had a slider on it. Just a thing you would press your finger in and slide back and forth, and it would change the pitch up and down. Yeah. And there was a way you could make your own. I was excited about that, using a piece of VHS tape, because the VHS tape, you would just cut it out of the tape, had a material on it that had a resistance. And so you would make a sandwich of it, and depending where you press along that strip, you would get more or less resistance. Now, the fact is, I never got that working, but I built the circuit on a breadboard with an oscillator, which is a thing that makes a frequency happen, like a the electrons just pulse over and over again really fast.
Okay, and a breadboard's where you stick electronic components in really fast so that you can really quickly prototype something.
And I happen to live half a mile away from, it's gone now, but an electronics store in Cambridge. So I could just go buy the components. And so I was able to put that together. I think it was like a little op-amp integrated circuit. There's an easy way to make a oscillator. So, and then you could connect that to a speaker or to your PA in your house and listen to the sounds.
The PA in your house, obviously.
And somehow, and I don't remember how this happened, but I know it was 2003. I had a banana. And I could connect, instead of to the VHS tape to make the fun strip that you would slide back and forth to control the pitch, I connected one end to the, I halfway peeled the banana, one end to the flesh and one end to the peel. And then you could make something that actually would make a sound like by opening and closing the peel of the banana.
And I'm laughing because later bananas played a big role in one of the most famous products that we made together.
Little did I know at the time. And that summer, I know it was 2003 because that summer I worked at a summer camp called Maze Makers that I had attended as a child, as a counselor in 2003. And I was teaching the air quotes, science class. And I was like, okay, what do we do? And I had made this thing at home in my basement the weekend before, and I just brought it to the kids and they were so excited to play around with it. And we were just attaching it to different stuff. And it's funny how much that parallels something that you did later on.
Oh, the Drawdio.
Yes. Because it's very similar in a way. Yeah. But also quite different.
Kind of the same thing. So I actually had a little circuit kit that I had gotten on the street market in India, in Bangalore, when I was there working in a camp in a slum area. And the little kit was called a harmonium kit, the way they called it. And that it was, like you said, with the VHS tape, or like you said, with the sliding the finger up and down and making the different pitches, it was a resistor ladder that let you touch different pads on the circuit with a metal wand. And each pad would be the next note of that's like a piano, basically the white keys of a piano.
And a harmonium is a piano-like instrument that uses forced air over reeds, I think.
Yes, that's right. And actually was brought to India by Christians proselytizing. And the Hindus were like, hell yeah, this is awesome. No, not the Jesus part, the harmonium. We'll keep it. And they still use it.
Because you can make a kind of beautiful flowing drone music with it.
And yet carry it around.
Yes.
Unlike an organ. So I was making that and I was just learning to solder. I mean, I had learned, but I was just kind of learning to be good at it and to put kits together and how circuits worked. Even though I'd been trained as an electrical engineer, somehow really just doing what I wanted, not following a circuit diagram to put it together, but coming up with my own ideas around circuits was still brand new to me, even after 4 years of training. So it's like not just what you know, like I had like a very high GPA from like a, half decent school in electrical engineering. So I knew things, but that's different than activating that knowledge to create new pathways into the world. Yeah. And so I was just gaining that, at least in the circuit area for sure. And I was also getting this great food made for me by the woman who lived downstairs, vegetarian Indian food that tasted, at first I didn't like it. And then I ended up loving it after a few days, but I spilled some on the circuit and it made some sounds. And that's because just like licking your finger and sticking it inside of the circuit bent toy to change the resistance, I had changed the resistance pathways between some of those pads that you would normally touch with a metal wand. And I realized you don't need the metal wand. You can touch them with, in that case, doll, but you can also touch them with your finger and you can touch them with anything. And I guess in a sense, Drawdio was born out of that initial moment, although there's a little more pathway to it. But this idea that you could have a circuit that you can touch to stuff and the stuff will change what the sound makes. That's the heart of Drawdio, and also the heart of maybe that banana thing you were mentioning. Is that where we left off?
It's all very resonant. That must be one of the reasons that when I arrived at the Media Lab in 2007 and we met and you had recently invented the Drawdio musical pencil, that I was like, oh yeah, I know what this is. This is awesome.
That's why you were able to contribute. You never told me all this. So like I was working with Draudio, which was a circuit you could thumbtack into a pencil and turn the pencil into a pencil that draws sound, or add to a paintbrush, or add to a kitchen sink and touch the water coming out of the kitchen sink and play the water coming out of the kitchen sink as
Love that one.
like a kind of like a violin string or a theremin where you could make the sound go up and down. And you jumped
for the video.
Yes.
I was able to play a tiny bit of Itsy Bitsy Spider by putting different fingers into the stream at different
into
heights.
the water spout at different heights.
Exactly.
I think is what you meant to say. Let me fix that for you.
Thank you, sir.
I'll play that video over this, but yeah, and it was, I think, your idea to play that song, and I'm like, can we really get a sound? And you got sound, and not only did you get sound, but you got vibrato out of the kitchen sink water. And the reason you were able to jump in on that so fast, I guess I only know at this moment, I didn't know before. I was like, wow, you're really good at thinking about this Draudio stuff. It was because you had been taking a parallel pathway in music exploration that was about as close as you can be to what I was working on. So you jumped right in and you said, well, we've got to write all the ideas down. Let's get this straight. And actually, one of the things that you do a lot of times is say like, whoa, you got a lot of crazy stuff. Could we like put it in a line so that we can do all of it? And you were doing a little bit of that, as well as bringing new ideas and as well as just amping up the energy. A lot like the way this interview started, like calm, and now it's amped up, and then it feeds back on itself and resonates. And we would do that in conversation, and we would also try the Draudio out in different places, trees and suits and macaroni, and not in a pot, but on a plate.
That day was amazing. I remember running around the lab, like we would keep having new ideas and trying different things. And I think there must have been a moment where I said, oh, let's slow down for a second, because I knew that we could get to things that were really far apart from each other, that there were a lot of different possibilities. And so it helped me, at least, to draw little pictures of them and say, here's this space of possibilities. Let's try to get to all the different places. And in a way, that's also an idea that I've learned in retrospect, maybe more from you, actually, about...
Or did I learn it from you and then you learned it from me?
That we think broadly about creative tools as being... the image in people's minds of what's possible comes from the examples that you show in large part. And if those examples are really far apart from each other, that space of possibilities is larger, and the creative tool is literally more powerful. It can be the same tool, but if you say it can do music and stories, or you can make music from a tree and a faucet and your couch and a group of friends, that space is much larger than if it's just like, oh, you can use just a banana. And I think I arrived in the just a banana and it could be anything else space.
That's a lot of things happen that way. Like you could make this and other stuff, which is not a very rich description.
It's just hard for people to imagine all the other things. You have to show them, I think. Or that helps to create that space of possibilities in people's minds so that they can imagine more.
This is what they point to in the Ren and Stimpy song about Log from Blammo. And Log really can't do shit. But if you're the makers of Ren and Stimpy,
it's heavy, it's wood.
It rolls downstairs, a loner in pairs rolls over your neighbor's dog. It's great for a snack. It fits on your back. It's log, log, log. It does a lot of stuff.
It's better than bad. It's good.
Yeah.
Everyone has a log. Why don't you have a log?
Right. That's just the marketing, but
yeah.
That's the FOMO. Right. Gotta throw that in. But the first, and later in my thesis, I wrote about this as calling it the sample project space, or maybe it was already called that. I don't know. But anyways, I wrote about it, calling it that. And I think you're right. The first instance, definitely together, but I think the first most potent instance of us doing that was when we drew out all the things you can do with the Draudio. And I remember in particular, there was like some fruit, maybe even a watermelon, which didn't end up making it to the final, but maybe you had used a watermelon to make music before. But anyways, you were pencil sketching a number of things, so a faucet, a tree, and a watermelon on a piece of paper. And while we were conversating, you were making really, it wasn't a map because it was 2 columns and they really didn't, the 2 columns weren't different. So there was just a list. You're making a list of the different things we could do, but that's like the early this is not the first time anyone's done this, but this was for us. It was the early makings of a map of the types of projects one tool can give you. Hammer, saw, wood gives you a chair and other stuff. Okay, that's not as interesting as a chair, a house,
a dinosaur skeleton,
a roller coaster. Wait, I can do all that? Maybe I care about hammers and wood now. Tell me more.
Yeah.
And so this Drawdio thing, circuit that makes music, a musical pencil is interesting, especially because, hey, that's cool. Maybe I can make music with it. Oh, isn't it clever? Isn't the designer of this musical pencil clever? But a little circuit that lets you turn a pencil and a paintbrush and a sink and whatever else you want into something that starts to seem like a lot more powerful. And that power is actually flowing through the inventor, which is no longer the inventor of the tool. You who are using this tool become the inventor, just like a carpenter has power to make anything. Now you have the power to make anything with this tool or with carpentry tools or any tool. And that's the beauty of a tool, is that we don't, the tool designer can be glorified, but the tool holder gets to imagine future possibilities and reinvent the world.
I love that. And that feeling has really changed my life and changed what I feel is possible for me.
That's what you were referring to with the bubble blower.
Yeah. I just want to bring that experience to other people, a feeling more powerful, like you can transform the world around you, and that transforms your sense of who you are. I love that.
I love that link between change the world, change who you are. So it's inside your skin and outside your skin at the same time. And they're almost not mirrors of each other, but they go at the same time. As you change the world, so you change yourself. And then you can change the world more.
I think so. And there's a question in my mind of how accessible that is to other people. Because there is that kind of like the barriers I was talking about before, like the sense of like technical fields and expertise and credentials.
Yeah.
It's like, am I a maker? Can I be a maker? Who is a maker? What do makers look like? But I think making tools that put the power in the hands of more people to have those experiences helps with that.
Right. Yeah, and you've made most of the tools that you've designed are accessible for someone without training to get started with, either right away or soon, without a lot of work.
That's the sort of image of it. That's the hope of it. There's always more work to do on that.
Maybe we should talk about another tool. Do you know what the first thing was that you made when you got to Media Lab?
Right. We were talking about how we made Scratch projects together in the early days.
True.
And then I was hacking on Scratch to try to modify it.
Oh.
That's something that I've continued. I still do.
You still do that?
To this day.
In fact, that's your job.
I'm now director of Scratch Lab as of this week, returning to work after parental leave.
Oh, we should talk about Scratch Lab. It's really cool. Yeah. Unless you wanted to go back on that other thing, because Scratch Lab is really interesting.
Well, I'll just mention that very first experiment.
Okay.
I was like, well, where else could Scratch programming go? And I wanted to try to make my own blocks language for another world. And I somehow, for some reason, had been playing around a tiny bit with Second Life, a 3D virtual world where you could build stuff. And that felt magical to me, that you could imagine not just an object, but a place, a thing in this virtual space. Remember, this is 2007. So
yeah, 2007, and Second Life was like the metaverse, but it actually worked way back then. It had cachet. It was exciting.
In fact, it was already a little bit old school at that time. It was already kind of going downhill, but
True.
It just seemed possible. Like I knew enough about it that it had a programming language, and so I could modify Scratch and make it so you could generate code for that world. And then people did end up using the thing that I made, and it made it easier. You could program with the graphical blocks and create behaviors for a little creature or a building, or just automate your world just a little bit.
So you would code with Scratch blocks, a visual coding language, and with that code, now it was in Second Life. It wasn't in Scratch anymore. So if some people were hanging out in Second Life, you would put some blocks together, and instead of like walking around and touching stuff, like some stuff would happen from the code.
You could have things that, like you could make a little snail that follows you around as you walk, or a little pet that sits on your shoulder, or something that changes size or colors. So you could have interactive architecture when you touch the door and it swings open, and then a whole new wing of your house appears. Anyway, that was a strange and short-lived project, but one of the first things that I did at Media Lab. I've since done a lot of other experiments with blocks programming within Scratch and also outside of it.
That's true. There's a whole trail of those. Do you want to talk about the next one you did? I know you did a 3D blocks world with a collaborator.
My friend Dux Koschitz, who was in MIT architecture, and he was studying computation and architecture and 3D geometry and playing around with that. And I was showing him Scratch because we were taking a class together, how to make almost anything. So that's how we got to know each other. And he said, oh, we should make something together. And I was like, oh, that's going to be kind of hard. And it led to a long arc of many prototypes to try to build this 3D world of our own design. So not like Second Life, but just a world specifically for building up geometry from parts. So it was inspired by Logo, where you give a turtle in a 2D world commands to draw patterns. We decided for the 3D world, it would be a beetle. So the beetle moves around. You write a little program that describes how it moves around in space in 3D, and then it can extrude a path behind it or position spheres and blocks and other shapes. And by writing a relatively small program, you can have it generate a big complex geometric form. And then, of course, that was in the heyday of like consumer 3D printing. And so it was exciting to be able to then, press a button and a few hours later hold in your hand this strange object that you had written a program to generate.
But why not just use CAD? Like what would somebody do with this? Like, why is this more accessible or more useful or differently useful? Like, why not just draw the 3D thing and then print it out? Like, you were writing code to generate the 3D thing. Yeah.
So code allows you to generate complex patterns to like iterate things. So you might be able to draw a complex shape, but you can use code as kind of like using math to make forms in a new way that would be hard to draw directly, like fractals or complex nested shapes or spiraling shapes with hundreds of little pieces in them.
Also, I think you kept the original design philosophy from Logo about body syntonicity, or the idea that instead of saying, put a square here, put a square there, instead, you are a turtle, put a square where you are, take a step forward, now put a square where you, the turtle, are again. So rather than saying, put a square at x equals 0, y equals 0, and then at x equals 0, y equals 1, you just say, put a square where I am, take a step, put a square where I am again. And that's a more relatable, because we all have bodies that move around the world, more relatable way to put the code down. And you kept that for the 3D world in BeetleBlocks.
Yes, which is not to say it's easy to reason about moving around in 3D space, but that was one of the things that was just an interesting challenge. It's like, can we make that accessible to people, not just move forward or back and turn left and right, but like tilt back and forth, up and down, so the pitch up and down, or roll around another axis, or so because there's 3 axes around which you can turn, and it's relatively hard to reason about that. But we played around with it and tried it with people, and
because people don't fly up in the air, so they don't have that built into their brains.
Yes,
or tunnel underground.
That's one of the reasons that Star Logo TNG, which I mentioned, was also a 3D world. It didn't have those axes of movement. It only let you move in a plane, like forward, back, left, right, and then also up and down.
Oh, it did let you move up and down. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But only up and down, not at weird angles.
Yeah. Although, you could hack the system like I did for my 3D Orbits project, but.
Okay. Okay. Right. So you made a bunch of blocks, and can people still use BeetleBlocks? Oh, and can people still use Scratch for Second Life? No, that's not published, right?
Scratch for Second Life, oddly, lives on because people were so excited about it that they ported it. And
cool.
So there were other versions of it created. There's a thing called OpenSim, which is, I've never used it, but apparently it's like Second Life, uses the same protocols. And so somebody made a thing that's like Scratch for Second Life.
So it had its own viral life after you.
Due to the labors of a few obsessed people.
Cool.
And then BeetleBlocks lives on because, so Dukes and I eventually found this wonderful guy named Bernat Romagosa, who is based in Spain and is an incredible hacker. And we used a version of Snap, which is a programming language that uses blocks that's inspired by Scratch. And at that time, it was the easiest way, this is now 10 years ago, to make your own thing that was Scratch-like, but to add a 3D world to it. And so I built the first prototypes of that in a hacky way, and then Bernat made it the real thing. And he also built this is crazy, a sharing website inspired by the Scratch community that has the BeetleBlocks editor built in so you can program your projects, and then you can also press a button and share it so other people could see and remix people's 3D stuff that they made.
So people can really use it. They can see examples and get started with it. Okay, great.
Yeah. And, it's the three of us doing the project. We haven't had a ton of resources to put into it. So
Sure.
But some people around the world still use it. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And wait, does that bring us up to Scratch Labs? There's a lot of things.
Yeah. I did want to mention Chrome Music Lab.
Oh, cool.
So after I finished my PhD at MIT, I worked for a little while at Google Creative Lab and worked with this amazing person named Alex Chen, who was leading a project where the idea was to, in the web browser, Chrome, show the world that incredible interactive music stuff was possible and really accessible and playful. And so I was excited to help with that. And so designed a whole bunch of interactive explorations of rhythm and pitch and harmony, but also of the harmonic series. One of my favorites is just a spectrogram, which is like a graph of the sound that the microphone on the computer is hearing right at this moment.
I love using that.
You can see the harmonics in your voice as you sing.
Yeah, so you can just actually turn this on. You can just Google like spectrogram Chrome Music Labs.
Yeah.
And you can turn it on and it will show you the sounds that you're making in time. And then they'll scroll to the left as you make new sounds and you'll see the old sounds. And when I say show you the sounds, I mean like any sound has a visual signature and it analyzes all the frequencies in the sound and shows you what the content of each sound you make is over time and then makes it into basically a colorful graph.
Yeah. And so you can see the pitch of your voice going up and down, and you can see the stack of lines that make up the harmonic series and any resonant sound, and you can see the clouds and nebula of noisy sounds like shh and shh, that kind of stuff. And each makes a distinct image in a spectrogram that corresponds in a way to the distinct perception you have of those sounds.
I bet I could run this conversation we're having now through it and throw that up on the screen. That would be cool.
Especially if I whistle.
Yeah, because whistling has a specific signature. It's close to a pure sine wave. And so on the screen, it shows up close to just one note. But when you make other sounds, almost every other sound, it shows up as several different frequency components all at the same time and fills the vertical part of the graph with all kinds of different colors.
Yeah, yeah. And I love, actually, I remember learning about spectrograms and bringing it. I found a program that would run on the computers that they had at that summer camp that I mentioned that I worked at in 2003. And so I had the kids running around screaming into a microphone to make spectrograms all the way back then. Yeah.
And did you have to look at them later, or did it show them to you in real time back then?
Crazily enough, that was real time on.
Cool.
It was when Macs were big, colorful boxes. You could get like an orange one or a purple one. I think.
Yeah, iMacs.
That's what we had at that time.
Cool.
And actually, I taught the kids overtone singing because I had just recently learned it.
That's two notes at once.
Definitely don't want to talk about harmonics and music and sound on a podcast without talking about overtone singing.
Eric, tell us about overtone singing.
So there was this weird dude that I met in college, and he would walk around the courtyards at night making this incredibly strange sound. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he said it was inspired by learning about people in Tibet. There's a tradition of throat singing, as it's called, which is actually several different techniques. And I've only learned a little bit. I can just barely do part of one of them. And that's what he taught me about. And it's where you sing, it's kind of like singing two notes at once. It's like, like that.
So if I show that on the spectrogram, then it would look like two different notes.
Sort of. What's really happening is changing your voice so that that stack of harmonics, all those different frequencies that normally when you hear them fuse together into one sound, because your brain knows, oh, all of these frequencies are related by that mathematical integer multiple concept. those must come from a single resonant object. Like your brain knows how the world resonates. So it fuses them into one sound.
It did almost sound like one sound, but not one normal sound.
And so what overtone singing does just makes one at a time of the harmonics a little bit louder in such a way that if you do it well enough, and I can just barely do it, it pops out. So it sounds like a separate sound. So it's a sound that's already there, but you're just making it everything else a little quieter and that one harmonic a little louder. And then it separates perceptually. You start to hear it as a separate
So it's
sound.
less of technically two sounds. It's more perceptually two sounds. So if I just sing a note like, like that's already several sounds.
Yeah.
But you just hear it as one because we're so used to hearing like a throat sing a sound that it just sounds like one sound.
All the harmonics are there, but you hear it as one thing. And so the lesson about overtone singing that I learned was that you talk like Marvin the Martian. If people don't remember the cartoon character, he has a funny voice like this.
Okay, I'm doing it.
And you're straining your throat a little bit. And what that's doing is suppressing the lower frequencies and brightening or making louder the higher frequencies. And that's where the harmonics are that you want to pop out. So you're trying to make it brighter. And then the other piece is focusing the resonance of your voice. So your vocal tract, like the place between your vocal folds, which pulse to make the sound in your throat and all the way up to your teeth, like that space is a chamber where the sound is resonating, like inside of a wind instrument or something. And so the shape of it controls which frequencies get louder and which get quieter. And normally we use that, like we have that in order to make vowel sounds, basically. Ah, ee, ooh. So that's the same pitch. So if I sing it, ah, ee, the difference between those things is not the pitch, but which frequencies are made louder and quieter. And so in the end, overtone singing is like just making a really weird vowel sound because what you're doing is focusing one of those resonances to be really narrow. So it picks off one harmonic only. And that's how you make just that one loud enough to separate out. And so the last piece of the lesson is sing like Marvin the Martian. Find a comfortable note that you can sing pretty loud that way. And then you say the word Oreo as slow as you can. And Oreo has between R and E, raising the back of the tongue just a tiny bit. And normally that movement happens really fast. It's only a couple of millimeters. And if you do it just as slow as you can find that sweet spot where you're picking off the harmonics. So like, and you can hear it kind of going up and down as I go from R to E. It's going up, up and down.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to try.
You can if you want.
Okay, I need to practice.
It takes a little practice.
Oh, man.
Yeah, please, listeners, try this at home.
Is it safe?
You might inadvertently open up other people's minds. I recommend trying it, if you can, in a place where there's a lot of masking noise. In other words, noise that will mask out the lower sound of your voice so that the higher sound pops out like a subway or a train. Probably the shower would work well for it.
Cool.
Anyways, that's one reason I love spectrograms is because you can see the overtones pop out.
Oh, right. Yeah. Spectrograms. Yeah. And I really love playing with spectrograms from Chrome Music Labs. And there's a few cool things in there. And you worked with Google to help make those, right?
Yeah. I was designing and prototyping those. I used one of my favorite prototyping tools, which is called P5JS, which emerged from the world of processing. And they're both programming languages designed for artists to quickly make interactive graphical and sound.
Shout out to John Midas, Casey Reese, Lauren McCarthy, all the people who worked on processing over the years.
I'm so indebted to all those folks it's a huge worldwide community of people really that make those things possible. And they're incredible tools that, as we were talking about the way creative tools change how you can think, those things have changed my world drastically. And so I used P5JS to prototype a lot of the interactive music things that we made for Chrome Music Lab. The voice spinner that shows your voice around a ring as you record it, and then you can kind of scratch it like a record and scrub it back and forth and change the pitch. Or
wait, is that mts?
No, it's called Voice Spinner.
Oh, Voice Spinner on Chrome Music Lab.
On Chrome Music Lab.
Oh, I don't know if I use that. So it's like a little DJ, a little virtual DJ pad?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. I'll check it out.
You can also play your voice backwards with it if you want to.
This is how I find out about cool stuff. Just sit here.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Yeah, Crow Music Labs has a lot of cool stuff. It also has, I don't think that you were involved, but isn't Crow Music Labs also have like a multi-person piano that you can play from all over the world together?
I love that, the shared piano, they call it. That happened after I went back to MIT to work on Scratch. And that was at least partly made by a wonderful creative coder named Tom Mann, who was a really fun person to collaborate with. He's brilliant.
Oh yeah, that guy's good. He made the original Makey Makey piano.
I forgot about that.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Wait, did you get into Crow Music Labs because of that? Or did we get him to work on this because of Crow Music Labs? How did we get to know him?
To be honest, I don't remember exactly, but he created a toolkit for making sound in the browser called Tone.js.
He's really good with web music.
And I used, that was very influential. A lot of people use it around the world. I played around with it a lot and made stuff with it. I made a thing that connects it to Scratch so you can program bleeps and bloops using Scratch with it. That's probably how we got connected to him is
Cool.
through that.
Okay. So you also now work on Scratch Labs, and which means that you take Scratch, which is a visual programming language that is now spun out of MIT into its own nonprofit, and you work for that nonprofit, and your job is kind of the research division of new types of stuff that Scratch can do, if I understand it.
Totally.
And so you've made a bunch of new stuff that it can do. Some of it's public, some of it's not. I don't know what you can or want to talk about, but you should tell us about Scratch Labs.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Scratch Lab is super exciting because it's imagining creative possibilities with Scratch, imagining the future. Nothing is secret about it, but we've only made a few things public using it. So over the years, in different versions of Scratch, there have been ways to extend it, to add. So it's a programming language made up of blocks, and we have now what we call extensions that add new blocks. And so I've often been tinkering with that to try adding sound synthesis, like I was just talking about, to Scratch, or to try adding, playing with different robotics kits and electronics to connect Scratch to the physical world, or play with interactive video in different ways, or to play with machine learning or music. And so Scratch Lab is a way to formalize that and share it with the world. And so a couple of years ago, we did a project where we took 2 of those experiments and published them so that people could try them out. And so it's separate from the main Scratch online community where kids can share their projects with each other, because we wanted it to be clear that this is experimental. It's not perfect. It could change. But that gives us this flexibility to try new things. So the existing Scratch Lab experiments, one is called animated text, and one is called face sensing. Animated text comes from the fact that kids really want to make dynamic words appear on the stage of Scratch. There's several ways to do text in Scratch, but one of them is relatively hard, which is drawing the letters individually on the stage. To make something like the score of your game appear in a customized way, or generative text, like to generate poems, or a word processor where you type. All that stuff is really hard to do. And so we realized we could make new blocks that made it really easy, really simple. The other one is called face sensing. And that one's really fun because what we're able to do is incorporate a machine learning model that tracks your face, the location of different parts of like your nose and eyes and ears. It's so fun because you can make something like the way you have in face filters in Snapchat or Instagram. You can stick things on your face and make a costume or like funny cat ears. Or
these are super popular.
Make stuff shoot out of your mouth. But instead of just using that, you can make your own. You can draw your own ears and animate them on your head.
Animate them in your own way.
In your own way. You can build things that interact with your face.
Right, like arbitrarily, like you could make a sound, and from the sound, the filter could spin or could like fly out of your mouth or something like that.
You could make it shoot rainbow tacos out of your mouth while you're talking.
That seems important.
This is powerful technology, Jay. Really. And it's like, yeah, that's silly. It's kind of goofy, but I think that even that experience of making something ridiculous like that has an importance because of the powerful transformative quality of it. It's like, I'm not, say it's a kid that's able to do that all of a sudden, they couldn't before. I'm not just a consumer, a user of somebody else's technology. I have the power to make it myself, and I can shape it and make my own meaning from it.
I think as powerful as the moving text, lab extension is, the face filter lab extension points in a direction that I think is like kind of like modernizing Scratch, or maybe more importantly, making Scratch relevant to what people want to engage with right now, which a lot of people want to engage with filters, and also just like video conferencing, or like video calls, or making videos of yourself, or taking pictures of yourself and then modifying those pictures in real time now, which the most popular way to do that is basically filters and face filters. Those are really popular for a good reason, because they're really, I mean, you're like playing dress up in real time with virtual reality or augmented reality, and to be able, to be able to draw some interesting geometric shapes with a turtle probably used to be pretty crazy, but these days it really isn't. And so as interesting as I actually personally do think that is, I think we need to empower people in ways that mesh with their culture and that are meaningful to them personally. I mean, even the definition of constructionism that Seymour gave, that I understand, is that you learn by making things that are personally meaningful to you. And so I don't think that I think we need to reach out beyond geometric shapes. And of course, Scratch does, but beyond what Scratch can do, lots of relevant stuff, games and stories and animations, which are like comics and things like that, are really relevant to kids.
Yeah.
But moving and staying with culture, and this face filter stuff really feels like it, like if I was a teacher planning a lesson, I could, this would fly with the kids. Like I wouldn't have to do a lot of convincing.
It's just obviously fun and funny.
Obviously fun.
One of the, it's not a metric, but one of the ways we think about like, oh, is what we're doing working when we're testing out stuff? Is like, are people laughing? We follow the giggles, as one of the engineers we used to work with said.
I never heard that. I like that.
Follow the giggles. Yeah. And we found that just trying it with each other, putting the kid hat on and playing with it and making stuff, it's like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And then if that happens to us, it could happen with kids. And we found that it did, that they were laughing as they were playing with stuff and noticing that they were able to do funny, unexpected things or magical things.
Yeah.
I agree that face sensing is powerful partly because of the cultural relevance, the right nowness of it more so than other things. It's also relevant in a different way, which is to say it uses machine learning, kind of like artificial intelligence. And that was one of the challenges with the project, is like, is this okay? Because there are ethical concerns about machine learning. And in particular, here, the difficulty is about bias. So we're using a technology that detects faces, and how does that work? Well, it's been trained on a large number of pictures of faces, but whose faces? And historically, one of the problems with visual technologies like that is that they don't work as well, for example, with people of color. We felt a responsibility to make sure that the technology we were using didn't have a harmful amount of bias, because there is a wide range of diversity among people out there and people that use Scratch. And so we looked at different alternatives, different technologies to see like, have they been evaluated? And that's something that there's not enough of it happening in the world. It's starting to happen. But we found that this particular machine learning model created by Google, it's called Blazeface, they had done what they call a model card, which is kind of like a nutrition facts statement, but for a machine learning model. And it talks about like where the data comes from and what measurements they took of it to show that it was unbiased in different ways. And it's not perfect, but it was the best one we could find. And we found that it was good enough for our purposes, that it was going to work well enough for people with different skin colors, for children as well as adults, across gender. And then also we found it's so robust that you can be wearing a face mask, highly relevant during the pandemic, and it still, even can only see your eyes, basically, will recognize your face and know where the different parts are. And so that made us feel comfortable with sharing it. But in addition to doing that, sharing the technology with people, we wrote up a blog post about our thought process, because we want other people to use, if they're going to use these magical, powerful technologies in tools for children, we want them to think about these things as well, to make sure that they're not biased in a harmful way.
AI is going to lead to a lot of surprising results. I don't think that much about AI, but do you think about it? Do you have anything to say about it? It's a hot topic that I know that we've both been using some AI art generators to make cool art.
Yeah, I've been playing with the AI text generation stuff for several years, and then the text to image generation, where you can just describe something like, I don't know, a banana riding a bicycle, and then bam, you've got a picture of it. I feel like I'm in the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, where they're like, we're going to go back in time and put an object there, and it's going to fall down right in front of us. Or in the future, we'll go back and anyway, on a podcast, you can kind of do that because anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, because we'll throw up the banana bicycle.
That's all I'm trying to say.
When people watch it.
Sorry to be awkward. I'm like not on a lot of podcasts or anything. So, but it's cool. Whoa. I love those things. And I find them, the AI generative creative tools, I find them tantalizing because there's a lot of problems with them. So the machine learning bias that is partly related to like the data and where it comes from. And
right. The bias is one problem, but there seems to be possibly bigger problems. Like, are you scared of AI?
Like the existential threat to humanity from the singularity or artificial intelligence becoming smarter than us. I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
I feel like you look closely enough at like what's actually happening out there in the world right now and the rate of change, it's like, it's not going to happen that soon.
Don't worry about it later. It'll be fine.
I guess so. But
although I didn't expect there to be such good image creation tools yet. And so I don't think that means so we should worry, but it is surprising.
It has changed and accelerated really fast in a way that is exciting. I was playing with AI text to image generation only like a year and a half ago. And so while playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, I would make a picture of one of my friend's character who was like a shadowy elf figure. And so I would just write a sentence describing that. And then like only 20 minutes later, it would make one little fuzzy picture of that kind of looked like what I described.
Which now is 10 seconds later.
Now it's like higher resolution, much better at interpreting what you're saying and making realistic pictures of it. And it's much faster. Stuff has dramatically changed. And there's a sort of explosion of interest in this and people making creative tools around it. And I love playing with them. I'm a little hesitant about saying, we should put this in front of children too. It's complicated. I'd love to explore that and see what we could do that would meet our standards, like say at the Scratch Foundation of like,
making
safety.
AI image creation tools as part of Scratch?
Maybe. It seems like a bit of a mismatch. But
it does seem, but we're just recklessly fantasizing as, or was it irresponsibly fantasizing as Andy Cabatorda taught me?
I mean, sometimes a really far out idea that's wrong or bad for some obvious reason, or just obviously wouldn't work, can get you to another idea that's actually inside those bounds unexpectedly. You might leap to a place that you wouldn't have leapt to otherwise by just making it safe to do that irresponsible fantasizing. So I really believe in that.
We do a lot of work around playing. And one thing that I've been thinking about lately is just like, it's people think it's exciting to gamify things because it hacks into, I think one of the reasons is it hacks into a kind of dopamine reward circuit and gets people kind of automatically or naturally, based on the biological nature of humans, naturally engrossed in some process that the designer of the game or, educational experience or whatever wants them to be engrossed in. And gamification can be pretty narrow in some senses because it'll lead you down usually a specific path. Although playing a game certainly is a beautiful way to explore your body and your thoughts and a set of tools and materials. So it can be nice also. But I think gamification fits into a broader category of playification, where like a certain type of playification is gamification. It just happens to be like a score, like a strict rule set with a scored, and you're not really supposed to change the rule set. That's the thing about games. You're not supposed to change the rules while you play in a normal game. And then there's usually something quantifiable, like there's a winner, or if it's cooperative, there's still a sense of a goal. Whereas playification still hacks into those same reward mechanisms that humans naturally have. Although it seems like less of a hack, because if you engage somebody in play, that's a type of, if you wanted to say it this way, it's a type of game, to expand out from where the games were, where you can change the rules. Most play automatically implies that there is a sense of what we're playing, but that can morph over time. So you are allowed to change the rules. And most play also...
like my invented sports birthday parties, for instance.
Oh, yes. I want to hear about invented sports. And it's
just thinking about games where you can change the rules as you play.
Oh, yes, like those. Yeah. Well, it's really, we should get into all of the cool games that you make people play after this. But I am excited about getting people to think about playification, because all of the people that we do research with on the future of learning are interested in play as maybe the most influential form of the most influential mode of learning. I would call it a trance, like a trance that people go into. It's not official, but I think of it as a trance that you go into, or like a special, very human, very ancient, possibly pre-human, definitely pre-human, because, many animals play, obviously, form of engaging with other people of your same species, sometimes peeps of different species. And you just enjoy each other, and you just try things with your body or your voice or some materials. You can do this with the dog. Dogs actually ask you to do it with a play bow. Humans and kids, kids famously ask each other to play directly or indirectly, and grown-ups could do it more if we could get out of our own way. But it's a very powerful mode of learning, because there's a natural propelling forward, and there's a natural on switch to all of the circuits that motivate people when they're playing. And it doesn't feel as constrained as gaming or gamification, although gamification is part of that, and gamification can be used, but there's this broader sense of that same aliveness you get when you play a game in the idea of playifying things.
I love that. And it makes me wonder how we can articulate the concept of playification to make it more understandable how to do it.
Let's work on that.
Yeah, no, gamification, people have invented definitions for what a game is.
Right.
And then you can imagine ways to apply those mechanisms, like that makes an experience, into a game, to something that's not already a game.
Yeah.
But what about play experiences? It feels harder to me to pin down what we mean by the features of an experience that make
That's
it
because
playful.
you didn't take out a piece of paper yet, and we didn't start drawing the map yet.
But it's not impossible. I think that...
I think that you have to get specific concrete modes. Like game is a concrete mode of play. And then you can have other concrete modes of play, like expression is one that me and you try to go to a lot. But we think of it as like, oh, this is just a mode that makes good tools, but it may be a type of play when something has high expressivity, like a musical instrument or something is usually you don't win music, right?
Right.
But it is definitely like an expressive, like same with theater, same with dance. It's a particular mode. It feels like you're playing when certainly if you're dancing with someone else, certainly if the routine's not figured out, you're definitely being playful.
Yeah.
And if you're improving music, you're definitely being playful with each other or with yourself.
Mm-hmm. And then, so that's expressive things. Another one is more like tinkering, where you're building things.
Nice.
And I think of tinkering, which is a whole other area to unpack, but one aspect of it is that you have this kind of provisional or ever-shifting way of thinking about your goals. You see a material like the piece of paper, and you're like, oh, I could fold that up and make it into a little boat. But then as you start to fold it, you notice that, what if I flip it upside down? Maybe it's a hat instead. And so as you have a conversation with the materials and try out different things and notice and observe what's actually happening in front of you as you play with something, it allows you to shift the direction that you're taking in your goal. And so I think of tinkering as partly being about that. And so can you design for tinkering? Actually, Mitch and I together wrote a paper. It's called Designing for Tinkerability.
You threw yourself a softball.
Well,
And you have a sign behind you, I'll just point out, that says, I hot glue gun tinkering.
yes, and that's from the folks at the Tinkering Studio at the Exploratorium, who we've collaborated with over the years and love so much. And I love how they think about tinkering and bring it to the world. And so I think tinkering is part of playification potentially as well. And the question is how to, you can't really codify it, but what are some ways we could encourage its development in the world so that people could incorporate tinkering as part of the experiences that they make for
But
people?
to the degree we don't codify it is to the degree which people can't implement it if they don't already understand it intuitively.
We just got to make beautiful examples of it, I think.
Yeah, the examples would be nice and a little set of rules that would just be rough.
You know, the paper that Mitch and I wrote, Designing for Tinkerability, talks about Scratch and how that's tinkerable. And also it talks about Makey Makey, which we haven't talked about yet somehow.
Oh, that's true.
So we should probably talk about that.
Yeah, let's do it. What is that shit?
I was really proud to see recently I went to the newly reopened MIT Museum and I donated to them some historical artifacts, including a little piece of paper where we made the first drawing of what later became the layout of the first printed circuit board for Makey Makey. And even older than that, the first hand soldered prototypes of what later became Makey Makey that we tried out for the first time ever, that we built in and tried out for the first time in the Exploratorium with the Tinkering Studio folks in 2010. But of course, the idea goes back before that even.
Yeah, the idea has many tributaries, I guess.
Yes.
It's like, how can draw audio be for a computer? How can we take what we saw in keyboard hacking, where people pop the keys off of keyboards and solder on wires to what's underneath a keyboard, which is like two little metal pads, and then put a button or something else on that? And also, how can we just like repurpose junk and, dumpster dive to make things? And what are the other, there's so many tributaries that formed it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But we should say for people, Makey Makey is about, it's called that, Makey, make anything into a key, because, just to say it, it's a little circuit board that you plug into your computer. The computer thinks you plugged in a mouse and keyboard, but you can make your own keys. So by completing a circuit through anything even a little bit electrically conductive, you can tell it, oh, I pressed W or I pressed the up arrow. And then you can control any software on your computer that you have. It's weird to be telling this to Jay, but that uses those things.
We're explaining for listeners.
Yeah. So you could make your own game controller or musical instrument or other kinds of inventions with it.
Yeah. And actually, this has a weird callback to what we were talking about earlier, where and I didn't ever think about this before, but when you tap anything in the world, it makes a sound. We talked about that earlier. And but what if when you tapped anything in the world, instead of making a sound, it did something to a computer? Makey Makey actually does that. And I never thought about it in that, and in that parallel path. But yeah, it makes it so that you could touch anything in the world. And that thing could then tell the computer, do something, such as in a video game, jump a character, in a musical, in an online musical instrument, play a note or a drum beat. Or if you have an online camera, like on your laptop or potentially even a device, take a photo. Anything that a computer can do that can be triggered by a computer key or a mouse click, which, as it turns out, is basically anything that a computer can do, period.
Pretty much.
Can be done by touching any object in the world with your finger or touching any two objects in the world together. There are some caveats that the object has to be slightly conductive, but any object can be made to be slightly conductive if it isn't already.
You could just put aluminum foil onto it, or as Jay likes to do, cut open an avocado and smear that on there, or just get it wet. Or
why use water when you can use avocado?
Or use Play-Doh, which works too. Yeah.
When I'm not using avocado, I just sometimes use affogato. Which is espresso on ice cream. It works almost as good as avocado.
Almost anything that you can eat or that has ever been alive is probably conductive.
Or that is still alive.
Or that is still alive. We'll probably work with Makey Makey, yeah. And some metallic.
Not things with exoskeletons.
Unless you squish them.
Which we don't. We talked about this.
Sorry, Jay. Jeez.
Oh, man.
And just to make a link back to earlier in the conversation, the electronic musical banana that I made, years ago, it turns out one of the canonical Makey Makey projects, of course, is the banana piano, where you touch each banana to play different musical notes.
Which, when we made the video, was the fifth example in the series of examples in the video of what you could do with the Makey Makey, a banana piano. It came in at number 5, if you don't count the intro example, which we added on later.
And didn't get a lot of screen time.
Yeah. So number 5, and didn't get a lot of screen time. And we assumed number 1 would be the most popular, which was a Play-Doh game controller, where you plop down pieces of Play-Doh on a notebook paper or anything, and then you alligator clip to each piece of Play-Doh, and it looks like a game controller, up, down, left, right, maybe A and B or 2 buttons. You alligator clip to each button, you put the other end of the alligator clip onto the Makey Makey, and then you Google whatever game you want to play. We, in our example video, did Super Mario.
Yep.
And we thought that would be the most popular, and it wasn't. It was a banana piano.
Yeah. And why is that? The internet loves bananas. Maybe it's easier to understand what it is and how it works.
Maybe it comes back to your laugh rule. What's that rule called? Follow the giggles?
Yeah. Yeah, that's from my friend Paul, but I love
Play-Doh
that.
game controller is on the giggle meter. It's not a 0, but banana piano, it wins.
Well, it's ridiculous. It's funny. And also it's like squishy. It seems like, oh, you shouldn't do that. The Play-Doh game controller is also squishy, but in a less gross way. I remember there was a maker fair in California where we showed Makey Makey at a booth during the launch of the Kickstarter.
Oh yeah, we had a huge banana piano.
And also we had a huge number of bananas because there would be busloads of kids coming and whacking the bananas to play it.
Yeah, we had to switch them out.
They would get squished.
Maker fair is not the same as like a toy fair where you have grown-ups stopping by with badges on or something.
Oh, it was chaos. It was so fun.
There was a beach ball where you could play a video game called Squishy Physics.
Something like that.
Yeah,
you kind of squish something to make something else bounce. Yeah.
Yeah. You'd solve puzzles by squishing the beach ball with your hand. And there was just some, aluminum foil on the beach ball. And then there was a huge banana piano. And that was the first time the world saw Makey Makey in person. And 24 hours before that, we had launched it online on a Kickstarter. And we had high hopes.
Yeah.
But I think we reached the absolute maximum of what we ever imagined was possible.
Another totally life-changing experience for me too. Yeah.
$500,000 in 30 days of products sold, which we then took and invested back in and made more Makey Makeys and sold more Makey Makeys. And then that began the cycle that continues now.
It's fantastic and continues to grow and spread around the world. And one of my favorite things about Makey Makey as a project is just how much it does this thing that I always want to see with creative tools, that when you put it out in the world, somebody uses it to make something that you never imagined or expected to be possible. And with Makey Makey, we still see that to this day. People do things that we didn't think of.
That's the goal. If you make a creative platform and people only make the things you predicted with it, that is a class of creative platform that is still beautiful, but it doesn't lead to uncountably many or unpredictably many. There are no what I call wild projects that go beyond the sample projects. And when you try to diagram out what you think a tool will lead to, because a tool is nothing. You look at a tool, like look at a camera, that's nothing. Why does a camera matter? Because of movies, because of photos, because of TikTok videos, because of family albums, and because of shared memories. The camera itself is meaningless. And so when you want to understand a camera, if an alien said, why camera? You would say, 'cause movies and 'cause photos. And so that is your set of projects that fill the space. It's the outcome, it's the expressiveness, and it's the beauty of the tool. And a camera itself isn't beautiful. I mean, unless you're really a technophile. What's beautiful is all of the output. And so when you design a tool, the question is, what can it do? And if the answer is only one thing, then you don't have a tool actually. And if the answer is a couple things, then, okay, you don't have a creative tool. Sorry about that. Yeah, exactly. I saw you question my thinking, and then I instantly questioned it and realized can opener, even though it really is only meant for one thing, is definitely a tool.
Yeah.
But a creative tool has to do more than one thing.
Yeah.
And so, or be able to have more than one output project by the time you're finished. And so as you enumerate the different things, as soon as you have 2 things you can do with the tool, then you have a project line. And as soon as you have 3 things that you can do with the tool, then you have a plane of things that you could do with the tool. And you can start to interpolate on the line or on the plane. Oh, what else could be in the middle there? And if you can imagine that things could be in the middle, then that's a good indicator that other people will make things that you didn't think of with the tool. And those things are the wild projects. And this is what we live for, I think.
I love that. I was just thinking about it spatially too. Like if you have 3 things, there's this triangular space and so there's stuff inside it that combines the ideas
there's the inscribed projects.
But then also there's going to be things if we do it right, well outside of that.
Oh, I hope so.
That define a whole other spaces of possibilities.
Give me those outside the triangle projects.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Let's think of some examples of things that people did that we just
with a Makey Makey
didn't consider. Yeah.
I mean, I copied one of the ones that was my favorite. It was a slackline. The ones that the people made was a slackline, and when you jumped up, you would hit these cardboard boxes, and they would make Mario sounds. Like you'd hit a question mark box, and when you landed back, and when you jumped off the slack line, it would go like boing, and then when you hit with your fist, like these boxes that were above you, it would go like or whatever the sounds are, or ba-ding if it was a coin.
I love it.
I think the flower power makes that sound.
That sounds right.
And I just love the slackline project. So when I made Makey Makey Go, I used slacklining in a different way, but as a game because of that project. And that was well outside of the triangle circumscribed of wild projects. So
yeah, I mean, that creative energy that we get from people around the world who just because they love the product so much, like make something cool and share it with the rest of the world, that feeds back into what we do and helps us make more stuff. So I was always grateful for that energy that people, because documenting a project is hard and people really put work into it. I was just thinking about other examples like the beautiful kissing booth that we saw within the first couple of years. So
like kiss revolution, basically.
So that the contact is not just between, a hand and a banana or between 2 people doing a high five, which is really fun, but it could be between 2 people kissing each other and that using that to take a photo of them or something like that.
And in that case, they were trying to kiss to the rhythm.
Oh.
Or at least the Milka booth. It was a chocolate company. And they made a kiss at the right time and repeatedly at the right rhythm in order to win the game.
That's so good.
That's what I meant by kiss revolution.
Yeah. No, yeah.
But what a sublime way to give input to a computer.
Through an actual kiss, yeah.
Yeah. Really that's just not like a UI that is commonly manifested. And the fact that people can just on the fly throw that one in, it really does bring to life nature as user interface, which was a paper that you and I wrote. I believe the subtitle of which was MacGyvering and Martha Stewarding Nature and Everything Else in the World, including the Kitchen Sink, to Make User Interfaces for Computers, or something like that.
I think you wrote that subtitle, not me.
Possibly.
It was good, though.
But you were there.
Yeah, totally. Writing together has been interesting. I hope we can get a chance to do that.
Let's do it. Let's write playification together.
Yeah, man. I'd love to do that. Wow.
So you actually collaborated with a bunch of students to make a lot of what I would still call semi-wild, because you were there, so they're only semi, but really cool and sublime musical user interfaces with Makey Makey that you put into a video. I can think of my favorite one, which is helium balloons touching a aluminum foil pad on the ceiling. So basically helium balloons as a musical interface.
That was a workshop that I did in the Netherlands with some college-age students, and they just in a couple of days put together a beautiful exhibit of a whole bunch of different interactive music experiences.
Yeah, fire some off.
So there was a fur jacket with conductive thread sewn into it, and it made these beautiful ambient sounds as you kind of stroked it. And that one actually was the first instance that I know of actually making it was wireless. It was a Bluetooth Makey Makey project.
Wearable wants wireless.
And the musical balloons were so beautiful. There's a room scale installation of things that you'd go around and touch with your hands to trigger crazy sound effects. There was a really fun looper that you controlled with your feet.
There was a glove.
The musical glove, I'm glad you mentioned that, was a really powerful example because the student, he was a jazz musician, and he figured out that, you could make it trigger different notes when you touch your thumb and index finger together and your thumb and middle finger, just the different combinations of fingers contacting you could trigger different notes with. And he made that into a musical instrument that he could really develop some expertise with. And he played some duets with people during the workshop, but he actually continued later after the workshop was ended and put together a musical act where they did, I think it was a Michael Jackson song, and they got on Dutch television performing that. And so it really took him places that he wouldn't have got to otherwise because he was able to use Makey Makey to invent his own instrument.
I didn't know that.
And in that way, it changed his life a little bit. So I'm proud of that. It reminds me of a story about somebody who approached me at a conference to tell me about their Makey Makey experience. Because I love to hear about how, like for me, it changed my life. And I think for some other people out in the world, the experience of using Makey Makey changed what they imagined to be possible.
I can't believe we waited 2 hours to start talking about it.
And anyway, one time somebody came up to me and said, yeah, thanks for doing Makey Makey. I backed the Kickstarter and I got one of the original kits and it sat on my desk unopened. And I've actually never used it to make something.
What?
But the fact of its existence made me believe that I'd never done electronics before, but if I could do that, I could do a whole deeper, richer set of exploration. So he actually leapfrogged right over it. It gave him the creative confidence to dive into Arduino or other electronics explorations.
That harkens back to the idea that if a tool exists, it creates new thought possibilities, which motivates new thinking areas.
Absolutely.
That we talked about earlier.
And usually it's through using the tool, to be honest. This person was an exception, I think.
Strawbees was a little bit like that with their the electronics that eventually Strawbees acquired into their company.
QuirkBot, I think it's called.
Yeah, QuirkBot. The founder of QuirkBot, if I have the story right, he told me that Makey Makey got him into electronics and gave him the confidence to first make like dozens of different projects, like Halloween, like coffin scare projects, and all kinds of playful things, and that got him to think that he could make something like an electronics kit that globbed on top of Strawbees and eventually was acquired by Strawbees. That's like a really powerful starter story for somebody. I was excited about that. Carl.
Nice. It's worth mentioning also the assistive technology, back to the things that we weren't, at least I don't think I was in particular thinking about that when we initially made Makey Makey, that it would open up these possibilities for people to create physical user interfaces for people that couldn't otherwise access things on the computer.
No, but in the second workshop that we ever ran, somebody had already made, this was at TEI, Tangible, Embedded, and Embodied Interaction, in Canada somewhere. One of the grad students in that... Toronto.
Yeah.
Eh? One of the grad students in that workshop, hey, I'm half Canadian, I'm allowed to say that.
Okay.
Took a big coil of spring and some Play-Doh and something like that and made a big button that was assistive technology. And that, I hadn't even thought of that. And that was the first time I saw it. And it continues to be a theme.
People making, a game controller for a car racing game for someone with physical disability that limits their movement to only one way of moving their hand back and forth, and you could just make a custom little controller with foil that is in their reach. You could shape it just to what that person needs. Or another one that I've seen is for someone that can only move their head, and you can position it just so that when their ear makes contact with one side or the other, that it works as a controller. And there's so much of that stuff. There's way more than I know about.
Yeah, that's nice. There's more than we are of everything on Makey Makey than we're aware of. But one of my favorite stories is the comic book reader that the dad made for/with his son who had cerebral palsy. And I guess the part that gets me, like, there's the obvious part that's jazzy about that, which is that like his son could read his comic book and the dad made it for him, which is pretty, but there's this extra deeper layer where the functionality of the kid's head and hand, specifically hand, but would change over time. It couldn't always do the same things on the same day. So the assistive technology that they had, they'd have to reorder it or get it redesigned, and that was really expensive. And the cost really isn't what matters that I get so excited about. What I get excited about is the kid and the dad would redesign the thing together on the fly with the Makey Makey. And it was worse than the real one, right? But
it worked.
It worked while they're waiting for the real one to change, and they would do it together and they could make it work, and then he could read his... So I just love that they would do that and that it would change over time, and that was fine because they could change it. It's no big deal.
It's amazing.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I love that. Where were we?
There's a threw us off there a little. There's a lot of assistive tech stuff. There's Vest Buddy is pretty famous. This is this kid who I think either can't talk or can't talk as much as he needs to. Has a special talk box that lets him say certain words, and I think even now can type, and say things because he's a little older. But maybe at the time he couldn't type. I'm not sure. But he couldn't take that out on the playground, and more importantly, his friends made it. And I think, again, this is what gets me so excited, isn't that it wasn't a better one. It was one that they all made together. The whole class made this jacket that when you touch certain areas of the jacket, it would say certain words, and they could put their own words in there. They could put their own voices in there. And so he would speak with all his friends' voices and words that they wanted to put so that they could play on the playground and so they could do the fun stuff that they wanted to do. And they all made it together, and they keep showing it at all these science fairs, and news loves to cover it, but regardless of the spectacle of it, because people do like to make a spectacle of assistive technology, what I really love is the friends coming together and making it together.
That's really meaningful. Yeah. Oh, it's so good.
And Makey Makey is nice like that, because you can all get your hands in, and you don't usually use one Makey Makey to one person. You can have one Makey Makey to multiple people. Everybody builds up something together. People ricochet ideas off of each other, and they start inventing stuff. And that is what we didn't build Makey Makey to teach people circuits. So if you're out there listening and you're a principal, yes, you should buy Makey Makey for your school because the kids will learn circuits. But I don't actually care that much about that. It's incidental. I mean, it's important in its own way. But what we, I think, get jazzed about is that people can learn to invent and get a literacy around invention, which harkens back to what you talked about earlier, about changing reality, making your world different a little bit at a time, pulling ideas from an otherworldly place, whether it's another dimension in a literal sense, or whether it's your imagination space, or whether it's your intuition, or it's just an idea you have, however you as a listener want to think about the magic space of where ideas come from. Other dimensional beings, I don't know, God, Mother Nature, but you get these ideas and you can make them physical in the world. And that's inventing. And that's also, it's venting in an idea through a dimension, a portal. And it's also changing reality. And that's there's representative democracy, which is pretty cool. And there's direct democracy, which maybe could be possible now with the technological barriers somewhat lifted at this point. And then there's, super direct democracy, where you don't vote on how everybody should do things. You just make the little corner, your t-shirt, for example, you make it how you want now, not through casting some opinion, but with your hands, you just directly change. You change reality with your hands, and it's different now for you. And if other people like the change, then they change it, and then it spreads. Or if they don't like it, it dies. And so there's this kind of natural voting that humans have always done by the nature of physics and by the nature of human mirror neuroning and learning from each other and following the pupils of each other's eyes because we have white around them. So we give away what we're looking at and we learn from each other. And so there's this automatic, it's natural in the sense that it's built into human biology and it's built into the physical world that fire spreads like fire. New ideas can spread, and especially amongst humans and some animals. And that is a way of governing, in a sense.
Or of creating an environment where people will shape their own destinies without governance.
Which is the kind of governance I would like.
It's that idea of, instead of shaping the situation by applying rules, it's by creating the environment where the things that you want to flourish will flourish. It's like gardening.
Right, gardening, you put things down and you hope they grow. I missed something in there. I love gardening.
I mean, I think what's necessary, if I don't know if I want to talk about politics, but if we want to create a situation where humans flourish according to a set of shared values that
If we can't
have
have hopefulness about the future of humans interacting with each other, then what are we allowed to do? We're allowed. Let's hope.
Of course. But it doesn't happen by itself. We're very much shaped by the environment that we're in. And so I think that's why the gardening metaphor works, is that we can grow a lush and beautiful set of flowers and edible plants and stuff, but only by creating the right conditions for those things to grow. You can't force them to take the shapes that you want. You can only set up the situation so that they have what they need.
Okay, so like laws are like a way of like forcing or heavily encouraging with punishments some behaviors. Incentives are a way of encouraging other types of behaviors with a positive. Maybe the carrot is the stick, so maybe there's no difference, but there's a polarity of positive and negative reinforcement. And that's different from creating an environment where certain behaviors naturally want to occur, not by punishment, but by the design of the scenario. Maybe I took it too far.
I think it's not something I've thought about a lot, I guess. So it's hard to talk about in depth, but like there's different notions of setting the incentives to show what we think is important. There's also just like taking care of people's needs so that they don't have to do bad things just to take care of themselves.
Right. But right. If, we all know that, well, maybe we don't all know. I think that if people are in any person, which includes me, are in a bad enough situation, they would do something that most people would consider a bad thing to do. And so by taking care of people, it creates a situation where a lot of crimes or just other negative behaviors don't have to happen. And that depends a lot on tool design, or in this case, environment design.
It's environment design, yeah.
And to the degree that social media is an environment, and partially a tool, partially an environment, we can design it so that humans can behave in more cooperative ways, presumably. It could be possible. And also the physical world, which is the original social media. It's called Life 1.0. We can design it in certain ways that lead to more cooperation. And we have seen over time different forms of government and different forms of whatever, like from fire stations to libraries to police departments to, like sidewalks to bicycles to houses, all of which having different influences on how we all cooperate, or in some cases don't, or when a storm comes, suddenly neighbors are all helping each other, and just different environments bring out different things in people.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned like a mutual aid kind of process, and that it doesn't happen everywhere, and it can happen under the right conditions. And I think cultivating the conditions for mutual aid is something that could really help.
What's mutual aid, where everybody helps each other?
That's all.
Oh, yeah.
But where that's expected and part of the culture. And
how about a social credit system?
So there's details. I don't know.
No, but I agree. I was just being silly.
Sometimes I think about this stuff in the context of the Scratch online community.
Yeah.
So that's part of my job, is to help think about the future of Scratch. And we have this big online community of kids making and sharing projects, and collaborating with each other.
100 million of them.
And the question is like, how and why does that work? And can we make it even better than it is? Because it's not equally accessible to everyone. And it's not the case that everyone gets what they need from it, or feels seen, or feels able to participate. And so how can we make it more equitable by like one of the problems that's been pointed out by people within our organization is that, like all social media websites, there's a kind of pyramid of attention. Like there's a small set of people who get really famous, and that, unfortunately, like the way we react to social media is like craving that attention. Like you want to try to get likes, you want to try to get views, and that somehow comes to replace the value of the doing and making of the thing itself.
Well, it's quantified and it becomes gamified.
And it's one of those examples of where that gamification can be harmful, because it incentivizes people to do things in such a way that, takes away potentially from the value of the activity itself.
What it focuses
the creative part.
It focuses a lot of attention on one type of project creation, which is project creation that will gain attention by the mass of the society or of the of the scratchers. And actually, there's nothing wrong with people creating projects for that. It's just that when all the attention goes into that, so many other things don't flourish, and that's just not as beautiful.
And so one of the questions is, how can we take that effect of the amplification of attention, and it's kind of like, what's the right word? Anyway, it filters or distills down to a smaller and smaller set of people who get more and more of the attention, and then everyone else is left out. And so you might feel unmotivated because like nobody looks at my projects, even though I put a lot of work into them. Maybe I'll give up and go home. And I think that happens to a lot of kids. And so how can we flatten that attention so that it's just more likely through the design of our web pages, what we show where, and the algorithms that decide what order to put things in? How can we flatten that attention so any given person is more likely to get views from somebody else or comments from somebody else? And we do know that when people get that type of interaction, especially a comment from another person that's encouraging, they're much more likely to persist and continue making things and growing with the community.
Or just a comment that is just getting interaction around your project. Even if it wasn't encouraging, it effectively is encouraging if you just say, oh, what made you think of that? Like
a question even. It's so
anything.
Motivating. Just people want that connection. And in this artificial world of an online social network, as opposed to in person, it's not as fair, and it's not as easy, and it's not as, it doesn't have the things that we built into the environments that we create to cultivate learning experiences, where we sit around a round table so that we can all see each other's faces, and where we make sure that everyone gets what they need to be healthy and happy. And we make sure that everyone can say what they feel, and others will pay attention to them. On the internet, like, it's much harder to do those things.
Yeah, I mean, you have control over the Scratch community to some degree. I have an opinion about this, and I would just make the analogy to celebrityship or celebrityness that we have in America, which I think is created by the round table becoming 300 plus million people sitting at it, and you can't see anybody anymore. And so then we have amplifiers, like TV cameras in the case of celebrities, or like magazine covers, or whatever you want to call these, Instagram followers, whatever, over the years. And that isn't necessarily a problem. I mean, obviously it presents a lot of problems, but the idea of, for example, in a class of 10 people, one person doing something special and everybody congratulating them and looking up to them, that's not a problem. Because tomorrow someone else is going to do something special in a different arena, and people will look up to them for that. Yeah. And so if you look at a tribe, let's say 150 or less people, or if you look at a family, let's say 5 people, or if you look at a block, let's say like 20 people or 100 people, or a school, which might be like 1,000 people, but traditionally might have been more like 100 people, or a class, which might be 10, 20, or 30 people. Having somebody be in the spotlight actually is totally natural and normal because the spotlight moves around. And so analogously in the online community, I don't think it's a problem that there's a spotlight. I don't think it's a problem that there are views counted, although it does present problems depending on how that's handled. I think that celebrities in a class are fine because the spotlight moves.
Absolutely.
And so if you can create classes and not a pile of humans, in other words, when the number of people just shrinks, if you can create, I've always said we need rooms.
Yeah.
And so you probably are working on that, but that's my answer.
Yeah. It's not to say it's straightforward, like how we might approach this and make it work and fully integrate it with our existing system so that it can be moderated, which is to say like the work of the behind the scenes, the incredible people on the Scratch team who make sure everything is safe and appropriate and fair for kids, which
God bless them.
One of the strengths of
or science
Scratch
bless them.
that makes it so successful is that we do put all of those person hours into making it feel safe for kids. So anything that we add to it needs to be compatible with that. But it seems possible. Like are smaller groups by their nature safer only if they're just as open and transparent?
I wasn't thinking about safety. I was just thinking about popularity being more manageable.
I think the motivational aspect of it potentially could change a lot. It could be, I wanted to tell a story about, we were talking about Mr. Levy, my 4th grade teacher. And I have a really distinct and strong memory of making those beeswax creatures. I was talking about making little creatures out of wax while he was telling stories to illustrate them. And I discovered one day that like I had a technique that I felt I had invented. I came up with a way to make a little 4-legged animal. And I was proud of this, and I showed the teacher, and he turned and asked me to share it with the rest of the class. And that had not happened to me before. The sense like I'm an expert in this, and it's important and valuable and interesting enough to other people that I can share it with them too. And that's just that kind of like rotating celebrity moment that you're talking about, because at other times, some other kid would come to the spotlight. And in a room full of 20 kids, you can really share that. But it takes, I think, the care and wisdom of someone like that teacher to spread it around in that way, to see what is latent and beautiful in each kid and bring that to the surface and share it with everyone else.
Yeah, identifying talents in children is one of the best gifts we can give them, co-identifying.
And so it's not the case necessarily that we can just build a system that will do that automatically. Like it's a talent of a teacher to do that. But we can create the conditions where it's more likely to occur. It's more able to occur.
I think another thing that's not obvious is that in a small group, when somebody becomes popular, whether the spotlight's rotating or not, there are other people adjacent to them who know them. And those people who are adjacent to them feel something connected to their moment in the sun, and also feel something about that. And then there's other people who are watching who either don't know them or do know them, but maybe less connected. And they feel proud because it's someone from their community that's doing it. So it's not that they feel bad that someone else did something great. In my hometown, when an artist makes a new mural, I'm not like, oh, I wish I made that mural. I'm like, oh my God, our community has a new mural. I'm so glad that we have great artists here.
You feel proud because of your connection to that person. Yeah.
So there is a sense in a community, and I think it's a natural sense that probably comes from like tribal biology or something. I'm just speculating, but there does seem to be a natural sense in a small group that when someone does something great, you can celebrate along with them. And it's not that you are not great and that they are. It's that we get to celebrate the moment together. And so there's lots of ways of participating in popularity in small groups. And I'm not saying they all end in greatness, but I'm saying that like when the soccer team wins, the football team can still be happy. Or when your team loses, but you had some good plays. And even if you didn't make the good plays, you could still be happy that day. And so there's just a dynamic system that isn't separated out when you don't know some random user on a large website or some random celeb, I think that's what they call them, in America with 300 mega people, then you don't feel anything anymore. And I think it's because it's beyond our comprehension or something.
And so how can we create these subcultures or little communities, little islands, little groupings of kids that feel a sense of shared endeavor and purpose, and through helping each other, they can enjoy the wins of other people within the group. It's like, oh, you got featured on the homepage. That's like the big honor on the Scratch community, is there's like this one row of projects, and every day or so our team adds a project there and it gets a ton of visibility, and then you get famous, and everybody wants that. But if you're part of a group and you help each other and one of the other kids gets featured, well, that might be amazing. But maybe your own group has its way of featuring projects just within that group, and then we could rotate that.
It's like a scene.
Another piece of it potentially is not just because we know each other and we're in it together, but that we're making something together. And I think that's another aspect of Scratch, the collaboration on shared projects that could be made even more powerful. I think with some creativity, we could add new features to Scratch that make it easier to make things together.
You have ideas about that already, right?
Well, one thing I was talking with another team member, Corey, the other day about how kids communicate with each other about their projects. And right now you can if you make a project, I can comment on it. But it's relatively hard to say like, oh, I have this drawing that I made that you could use in your project, or oh, I have a bug in my code, and then you can show how to fix it. It's relatively hard to communicate at that level.
Yeah.
But what if you could attach to a comment one of those assets from Scratch, like a drawing or a sound or even a stack of blocks of code? Maybe that would make it easier to collaborate. I don't know.
Right, you're pointing out implementable things that like low-hanging fruit that could greatly improve and that could scale with the size of the Scratch community?
Maybe. We'd have to think really hard about all this stuff because that particular idea is not so easy to implement. And the question is, would it introduce new moderation concerns? One of the things we want to avoid is private communication channels. In Scratch, everything is out in the open, and so it's accessible to the moderators and other people to report if they see something inappropriate.
Yeah.
And so we definitely don't want to make, direct messages between kids that are private and therefore hidden. But this particular idea, that would be out in the open. So maybe it could work.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is generate lots of ideas like that and try them and see what happens. We can't necessarily find out by imagining something if it's going to work. We'll have to prototype stuff and try it.
I think Scratch was successful beyond anybody's wildest dreams. We'd have to ask Mitch if that's the case. It was successful beyond what I would have dreamt.
I remember in those early days when it first launched, we were there in 2007 in May of that year, the first public launch, and it was amazing to see how much activity and excitement there was around it right from the start.
That's right. But like 100 million users I don't think it was on my radar ever. That we are approaching that, right?
Oh, definitely. It depends how you count. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure. But tens of millions of users is pretty clear. And that's like on the scale of the world. Like that's on the scale of, it's like, I don't know how many users Facebook has, but it's like less than 100 times. Like Facebook doesn't have 100 times more users than that. That would be 10 billion people. It's on the scale of a tech giant in a sense. Obviously, it's not running the same volume through or anything like that, and it's not as.
There's a lot of room for growth, definitely.
There's still room for growth, but and there's different people that Scratch wants to reach. But I think that due to its success, and this isn't anything against Scratch, but I think anything that succeeds at that level suffers from its own weight because it's just so onerous and so huge that it's hard to manage and introduce new things at the same time. It just becomes like its own giant, and it's just hard to work with.
And it's not just because of like system complexity, like logistically, it's hard to change systems that have scaled that much, which is true, but it's also because of a sense of responsibility that we feel to the kids that already use it, to keep it
cultural consistency and momentum.
To keep it as safe as it's always been and stable and consistent so that it doesn't change in ways that they don't expect and would be upsetting to kids because they're sensitive to that. And that is something that is a challenge, I think, for us as we try to imagine future new possibilities.
Especially as the Scratch research person, you want your jobs to change Scratch, and also Scratch shouldn't change. So what does that mean?
But I think there's a way forward.
Yeah.
I love tinkering with Scratch and imagining new possibilities, and especially trying them out with people and seeing what happens.
Do you still play with Scratch often?
I will sometimes modify one of my existing projects if I have an idea or make a new one. I
think you've published 200 Scratch projects. Does that sound about right?
It's in that ballpark.
I counted once.
Oh, okay. I have made a bunch. What have I made recently? The singing sandwich and the lunchtime band was a music project with food, or the talking centaur band name generator. I made a simulator project that shows how mycelium grow, so the branching root networks of mushrooms.
Oh, you recently read a book on mycelium that you told me some great quotes from. Can we at least tell everybody about my favorite quote that you told me about?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the name of the book.
Okay.
But it's being displayed on the screen right now.
Yeah, it is. So you don't need to remember it. You just Googled it in the future.
But one of the ideas that's mentioned just in passing in the book, which is a beautiful book about the biology and the culture of yeasts and mushrooms and other crazy fungal phenomena, is this idea, as opposed to going viral, of going fungal. Like, how can we take inspiration not from the spread of diseases, which go fast and burn out and are parasitical, but of fungal networks that grow slowly and seek out resources in such a way that they can be self-sustaining and that are not parasitic necessarily. They can be. The fungal world of biology is extremely complex and diverse, but they can be...
It's its own kingdom, right?
It is. It can be symbiotic in addition to being parasitic. There are a lot of fungal organisms that collaborate with each other and across the kingdoms of life with plants and bacteria and other things.
Maybe they're playing.
It does seem playful in such a crazy way.
Slow motion play. Yeah, we usually think of play as fast. But I think Makey Makey went fungal. I would like to think that Makey Makey went fungal.
Well, the video went viral.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, that's true. Because there were people from like 8gag and 4chan like commenting at one point or something.
Oh my God.
I mean, just meaning that it spread through all the crazy chambers of virality across the web.
It was quick and exciting and caught people's attention. And so something about it was interesting enough to make them want to share it with everyone else.
But the growth of it has been slower. And like a lot of times people talk about hockey stick growth for a startup, which is where it like, I guess, exponentially grows in revenue faster and faster. And I like to talk about rotating that hockey stick around a diagonal line so it becomes a hockey stick where the tip of the stick that would normally touch the puck is now touching the x-axis, and the handle of the stick is not shooting straight up in the air like it would be, but you lay it down on the ground. So a company grows and then kind of steadies off and just grows a little at a time. And that's what a fungal network does. And Makey Makey has at least, maybe for worse, maybe for better, but I actually appreciate it. It's a perfectly successful model for a company for something to grow slowly and steadily over time a little bit.
Yeah, and in such a way that its growth is sustainable because it reinforces itself. The people that are using it love it so much that they cultivate relationships with other people and encourage them to use it, not in this viral way where it's just like, this is exciting, do it now, but it's like, let's do this slowly together.
This is the power of new metaphors that nobody until the author of this book that I'm aware of, and only through you reading it and telling me, has invented this idea of going fungal. And it just shows how many more metaphors we need for how ideas can spread, like wildfire, virally, fungally, and obviously many more ways, which also brings up the idea of user interface metaphors and just the power of metaphors in general. We need metaphors just help us understand things because they're this rich picture that we already know and are familiar with and can splay across new thought spaces.
For example, fungal networks will fruit. The fruiting body is, of course, the smaller piece of the much larger mycelium network under the ground. One day overnight, it rains and up pops a mushroom, which makes spores, and those spread on the wind or in some other way. And then the mushroom can grow somewhere else new, far away. And with Makey Makey, we've seen a kind of crazy flourishing of ideas related to Makey Makey or inspired by it, where people make new things that either are built on top of our product or like it in some new way. And some of those are not great for us, and some of them are great for us because they bring attention to
it. All leads back to us. It's all great.
Yeah. So I think of that as a little bit like the way fungus fruits, that suddenly something new pops up overnight and spreads it to a new place that it couldn't get to before.
Okay, this is a little squirrely and rabbit holey, but I got a ride with a guy from Uzbekistan 2 days ago, and he had never heard of magic mushrooms, and he had never heard of the concept of psychedelics at all. And so for better or worse, I introduced a full adult with a family to just the concept that that there is psychedelics, just on the topic of mushrooms. Sorry, that was a little bit of a rabbit hole. I apologize. but I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, wait, are you sure you've never heard of this? But
so I'm noticing that it is time for me to go.
Okay, great.
Take over the holding of a baby while my wife cooks dinner.
Let's babyfy this. Let's wind down.
Yeah, but that was wonderful. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much for letting me come, if everybody didn't realize, into the attic of Eric's home. I don't know if we mentioned that.
It's a work in progress.
You tinker, and it is your workshop. It's where you work out of. Your main tool is now your laptop. Although you recently made a number of really cool physical world things, my favorite of which is the duet piano.
A musical instrument for two people.
To look at each other and copy each other and play off of each other and sit across from each other.
Improvise together and have a musical conversation.
Symmetrically. And so yeah, you sit up here, you make things, you invited me into your space, and a totally unique workshop that's just starting and evolving. Thanks for having me and the visitors come into your home. This was really cool.
Yeah.
I noticed talking to you that I talk to you in a way that's just so natural, like, I don't know, like drinking a smoothie or something, like just goes right down. And it's very easy to just be myself and ideate. And so I just really appreciate you. Thank you.
I appreciate it too. We have a good flow, and I'm looking forward to a lot more.
All right. Jacked out.